The basement of St. Bridget's wasn't cold because it was underground. It was cold because the building had been told it didn't matter anymore. Delia Monroe could feel it in the air as she wheeled another gray archive cart down the narrow hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Old linoleum sighed under her shoes. Somewhere above her, the hospital still made the familiar sounds of life. Distant footsteps, a muffled intercom, the soft rattle of a gurney. Yet down here, everything had become paper, names, numbers, dates. Everything a person once trusted the world to remember. Delia worked evenings for a contractor hired to prepare records for transition. That was the phrase they used. Not closure, not tear down, transition. Like the building was changing sweaters instead of losing its bones. She stopped in front of a steel door labeled Records C, tapped the old keycard twice, and slid inside. The room smelled like dust and stale cardboard. On the far wall, a handwritten sign somebody had taped up years ago still read, "Please return files to their proper place. Thank you." Delia had always liked that line. It sounded like a small kindness you could still obey. She pulled a folder from the top of the cart, read the spine, and blinked. St. Bridget's Community Care Covenant. She frowned. In the last 3 weeks, she'd handled discharge summaries, billing records, lab reports, archive personnel files. She hadn't seen anything labeled covenant. That word belonged in churches and wills, promises people made when they were scared enough to be honest. Delia opened it carefully. Inside were several brittle pages typed in formal legal language. A deed restriction, a trust clause, something about free and continuous community care services on the ground floor in perpetuity, tied to donor funds. Her eyes snagged on one sentence that made her throat tighten. Any sale, demolition, or conversion of the property shall preserve the community care clinic as a condition of transfer. Delia read it again, slower. Preserve, condition, transfer. Above her, the city and the investors were treating this hospital like it was already gone. Like the decision had been made and the only thing left was paperwork. But here was paperwork saying the decision wasn't that simple. She looked down at the last page, and that's when she saw the signature line, not the hospitals, not the cities, a donor name printed in bold at the bottom, Evelyn Alden. Delia's hands paused in the air. Everyone in Milwaukee knew the Alden name. You didn't have to follow business news to know it. The Aldens were the kind of family that had wings named after them, scholarships named after them, dinners where nobody touched the bread until the person at the head of the table did. But Evelyn Alden had been dead for years. The hospital gossip was that she'd been the only one in that family who ever walked the halls without a security detail. She'd founded the clinic downstairs. People still told stories about her stopping at the nurse's station with coffee and remembering first names like it mattered. Delia swallowed and turned another page. Something slipped out and fluttered onto the table. Not a document, not a form. A folded note on cream-colored stationery, the kind that felt too expensive to throw away. The ink had faded to a soft gray, but the handwriting was still clear. Delia unfolded it with both hands, as if it might break. Grant, if they ever try to sell it, they'll tell you it's just a building. It's not. It's a promise. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there to stand in the doorway. So you have to do it for me. Do not let them turn our clinic into silence. Mom Delia stared at the last word. Mom. Her breath caught so fast it almost hurt. Grant Alden wasn't just an Alden. He was the Alden now, the one on the magazines, the one people called the quiet billionaire, the founder of Alden Helix, the biotech company that had gone from a small research lab to a global empire in less than a decade, The one who gave speeches about innovation and building a healthier future with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. And tomorrow morning, he was scheduled to be in Milwaukee to finalize the redevelopment deal. Delia had seen the internal schedule on a clipboard upstairs. She'd heard the contractors whisper about it like it was a coronation. Alden's coming. Big day. Closing day. Delia's fingers tightened around the note. She could almost see the scene above her without having to be there. Polished table, bottled water, men in tailored suits, a pen placed in the right hand at the right moment, the way people did when they wanted something to feel inevitable. And here, in her hands, was proof it wasn't inevitable at all. A sound behind her made Delia jerk slightly. A voice rough and impatient came from the doorway. "Monroe, you still down here?" It was Rick Haskins, the contractor supervisor. He never called her Delia. He called her Monroe like she was a shelf label. Delia slid the note back into the folder fast, but not fast enough to hide her eyes. Rick stepped inside, chewing gum like it was a job requirement. He leaned against the door frame and pointed at her cart. "We need those cleared by end of shift. Anything labeled legal goes in the red bin. Don't start playing detective." Delia forced her voice to stay calm. "This file says there's a condition tied to the transfer, about the clinic." Rick laughed once, without humor. "The clinic is done. Everybody knows that." "It says in perpetuity," Delia said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "It says it has to remain." Rick pushed off the doorframe and walked closer. The air around him smelled like cold coffee and impatience. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice the way people did when they believed they were giving you a favor. "Tomorrow's a big day. Powerful people want clean shelves and no surprises, you understand?" Delia looked down at the folder again. Clean shelves, no surprises. A promise folded into silence. "What do I do with it?" she asked. Rick's eyes flicked to the red bin in the corner. "You do what I said," he replied, "or you go home early. Either way, this job stays simple." Then he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him like a period at the end of a sentence. Delia stood there for a moment, alone with the buzzing lights and the weight of that note. Above her, the hospital still carried people, still held their stories, still tried to be useful. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from her daughter. "Mom," school called again. "He was quiet today. Asked if we have to move." Delia stared at the message and felt a familiar pressure rise in her chest. Her grandson Mateo was 7 years old and already learning the language of instability, already listening for the sound of a door closing in the wrong way. Delia lived in a small apartment over a bakery on the south side. She worked 2 jobs. She did not have spare time for heroics. She did not have spare money for consequences. And yet, she could not put that folder into a red bin and pretend she hadn't seen it. Because the note wasn't written to her, but somehow it had landed in her hands anyway. She set the folder on the table and looked around the room. No cameras that she could see, no one watching, just rows of metal shelves holding thousands of lives that had once been urgent. Delia made a choice that felt almost too small to matter. She opened her tote bag and pulled out an old envelope she used for grocery coupons. She slid the note inside it carefully, then tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat, the one that sat against her ribs, the one no one ever searched because no one imagined she could be carrying anything worth taking. Then she took her phone and snapped a photo of the covenant page with the in perpetuity clause, making sure the donor's signature was visible. Her hands shook slightly as she did it. Not because she was afraid of getting caught, because she was afraid she might be right. She put the folder back in the cart like nothing had happened and kept working until her shift ended. She kept her face neutral when Rick walked past. She kept her movement steady, but inside, her mind kept returning to one image, a billionaire's hand closing around a pen, and the sound of a promise being erased with a single stroke. When Delia finally stepped outside into the night, the air smelled like snow and diesel. The city lights reflected off wet pavement. St. Bridget's stood behind her like an old woman who'd been told to pack her things. Delia pulled the envelope closer to her chest and walked to the bus stop. She didn't know Grant Alden. She didn't know how to reach him. And she didn't know what a person like him did when the past showed up holding a note from his mother. But she knew something else. If she stayed quiet, the wrong people would win without even having to try. And somewhere on the ground floor of that hospital, the community clinic would go dark before morning. If you're still here, hit like and subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. Delia sat on the cold bench and stared at the bus schedule, not really reading it. Because all she could think about was tomorrow. And the question that kept opening in her mind like a door she couldn't close. Would the billionaire even listen? Or would her little envelope disappear the same way every other small person disappeared in a system built to look past them? The bus headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Delia stood up and tightened her grip on the promise that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. In the morning, Grant Alden would arrive ready to sign, but Delia had one night to make sure that pen never touched the paper. By the time Delia Monroe got home, the bakery downstairs was already dark. The air in the stairwell smelled like sugar that had been baked out of the walls. She climbed slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed against the inside pocket of her coat like she could keep the night from stealing what she'd found. Up in her apartment, the heat worked in short bursts, the kind of heat that made you grateful and irritated at the same time. Mateo was asleep on the couch with a thin blanket tucked around his shoulders. His school backpack sat by the door like a small, tired animal. Delia stood there for a moment, just watching him breathe, and she felt the familiar ache of wanting to protect someone from a world that didn't ask permission before it changed their life. Her daughter, Rosa, stepped out of the bedroom, hair pulled up, eyes heavy. "They said he barely talked today," Rosa whispered. "He asked if we're gonna have to move again." Delia nodded like she'd known that already, like it didn't land in her chest. Rosa glanced at Delia's coat. "You're home late." "Work ran long," Delia said. She didn't add the truth, not yet, because some truths felt too large to set down on a kitchen table next to a stack of unpaid envelopes. Rosa rubbed her face. "Mom, we can't lose this place. Not right now." "I know," Delia replied, and she meant it. She meant it so hard it hurt. When Rosa went back to bed, Delia sat at the small table by the window and pulled out the cream-colored note again. The ink looked even softer in her apartment light, like time was trying to erase it too. "Do not let them turn our clinic into silence." Delia took out her phone and opened the photo she'd snapped of the covenant clause. She zoomed in until the words filled the screen. "In perpetuity, condition of transfer." She didn't know legal language, but she knew what a condition was. It was the difference between you can and you can't. She stared out at the street, where the snow had been pushed into dirty piles along the curb. Somewhere across town, people were sleeping in homes they didn't worry about losing. Somewhere across town, a billionaire was probably sleeping in a room so quiet it didn't even have the sound of pipes knocking. Delia's phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification from an unknown number. She didn't play it. Not yet. She just sat there listening to the silence inside her apartment, and she realized something simple. If she waited until morning, the pen would win, so she didn't wait. Before sunrise, Delia packed Mateo's lunch with the last 2 apples in the fridge. She kissed his forehead until he stirred and frowned in his sleep. She walked him 2 blocks to Rosa's friend who watched him early. She rode the bus back through a Milwaukee morning that looked like it hadn't decided whether it wanted to be kind or cruel. At St. Bridget's, the main entrance was already busy. Not with donors, not with cameras, with patients. A line stretched from the community care clinic desk out into the hallway. People in winter coats holding folders. A woman with swollen hands leaning on a cane. A man with a toddler on his hip, the child's face pressed into his jacket. An older couple sitting close together like they were trying to share one body's warmth. Delia slowed without meaning to. The clinic doors were still open, but something about the energy felt wrong. Too tense, too quiet. Dr. Nora Patel stood at the counter, jaw tight. She was speaking gently, but her eyes kept flicking toward a posted sign Delia couldn't read from this far away. Delia walked closer. The sign was printed in bold. Community care clinic hours. Change effective immediately. Limited services. Please speak to staff. A man near the front read it twice and then laughed once, sharp and hollow. Limited, he muttered. That's how they say gone, without saying it. Delia felt her throat tighten. This wasn't a rumor anymore. This was the first blade. Nora noticed Delia and stepped around the desk for a second, lowering her voice. You work records, right? Delia nodded. Evenings. Nora's eyes looked like they hadn't slept. They told us to start preparing patients for transfer to private providers. Like people can just pay for a new doctor. Delia glanced at the line again. They're doing this today? Nora exhaled through her nose. They're doing it before anyone can stop them. That was the first clear peak of injustice. The kind that didn't scream. The kind that smiled and used words like transition. And if you felt that in your chest, comment, "This is wrong," because it is. Delia leaned in. Nora, there's something I found. A covenant. It says the clinic has to remain. Nora blinked hard. A covenant. Delia nodded, careful. Signed by Evelyn Alden. It ties the property transfer to the clinic staying open. For the first time all morning, Nora's expression shifted from exhausted to something like hope that didn't trust itself. Who has it? Nora asked. Delia didn't answer that directly. Do you know where the signing is happening? Nora's gaze darted toward the elevators. Executive boardroom, 10th floor, 10 this morning. They've been cleaning it like the governor is coming. Delia's pulse kicked up. Grant Alden is coming? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Nora nodded once, grim. They say he's the face, the one who makes it good news instead of a funeral. Delia looked down at her coat pocket again, feeling the note against her ribs. Nora lowered her voice even further. If you have something real, you need to get it to him. Not his people. Him. Delia swallowed. How do I get to him? Nora's eyes flicked to the security station near the elevators. You don't. Not unless you're invited. Delia watched a group of men in suits step off the elevator, badges swinging. One of them carried a sleek portfolio like it was worth more than any of the people in line behind her. Delia turned toward records. She walked faster than she meant to. In the basement, Rick Haskins was already there, leaning over a table with two other supervisors. They were drinking coffee and laughing about something that didn't deserve laughter. Rick saw Delia and smiled like he was waiting for her. Morning, Monroe, he said. Big day. Delia kept her face steady. I need to bring something upstairs. Rick's smile thinned. No, you don't. Delia set her cart down slowly. There's a file. Rick cut her off. I told you last night. Legal goes in the red bin. The red bin goes out of the building. That's the system. "The system is wrong," Delia said before she could stop herself. Rick took a step closer. "You want to know what the system is? The system is you getting paid. The system is you keeping your little apartment. The system is your daughter not calling you crying because you got laid off for non-compliance." Delia's mouth went dry. "I'm not trying to cause trouble." Rick's voice dropped even lower. "Then don't." He tapped the edge of her cart. "You got a kid to feed. Remember that." Delia held his gaze and felt something in her chest harden, not into anger but into resolve. Because Rick was right about one thing. She did have a kid to feed, and that was exactly why she couldn't stay quiet. Upstairs, the clinic line moved slowly. A patient raised their voice. Nora soothed them with a hand on the counter and a tired kindness. Delia made her decision with the kind of calm that only comes when you've already lost too much to fear losing one more thing. She walked to the security station and waited until a guard looked up. His name tag read, "Luis Ramirez." "Sir," Delia said, keeping her tone respectful, "I'm staff. Records. I need to deliver something personal to Mr. Alden. It's important." Ramirez didn't laugh, but his eyes stayed cautious. "You don't just walk into executive meetings." "I know," Delia said, and she meant it. "But this isn't about the meeting. It's about his mother." Ramirez's expression changed, just slightly, like a door in his mind cracked open. "His mother," he repeated. Delia nodded. "A note in her handwriting." Ramirez hesitated. "Do you have it?" Delia touched her coat pocket. "Yes." Ramirez looked around the lobby. Two men in suits stood near the elevators talking into earpieces, the kind of people who treated a hospital like a venue. Ramirez lowered his voice. "I can't take you up there, but I can try to get a message through." Delia's heart beat hard enough she could feel it in her throat. "Please." Ramirez stepped away to make a call. Delia watched him speak into the receiver, his eyes shifting between Delia and the elevators like he already knew the risk of being helpful. While he was on the phone, Delia's own phone buzzed, a call from school. She answered quickly, already bracing herself. Rosa's friend sounded apologetic. "Delia, I'm sorry, but Mateo's school called. There's an issue with his paperwork. They want a parent here today." Delia closed her eyes for half a second. "Can it wait until afternoon?" Delia asked. "They said if it's not fixed today, he can't stay in school next week," the woman replied. "I'm sorry." Delia looked toward the elevators again, toward the men in suits, toward the invisible place where decisions got made by people who never waited in clinic lines. Ramirez came back, his face tight. "I talked to an assistant," he said. "They said no deliveries, no interruptions." Delia's stomach sank. "But," Ramirez added quieter, "Mr. Alden's security is doing a walkthrough. If you leave it with me, sealed, and you write personal on it, I can try to get it to his chief of staff." Delia swallowed. "Is that safe?" Ramirez didn't overpromise. He just said, "It's a chance." Delia pulled the envelope from her coat pocket. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote on the front, in neat block letters, "Personal, from records, about your mother." She handed it to Ramirez like she was handing him a fragile piece of her own life. Ramirez slid it into a locked drawer behind the desk, then looked up at her. "If they ask, I didn't see you." Delia nodded, grateful and terrified at the same time. She turned to go. And that's when the lobby changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that the air shifted. The front doors opened, and a small procession entered, 2 security men first scanning, then a woman, in a dark coat holding a tablet, sharp, fast, focused. Then, at the center, a tall man whose presence made everything else look like background. Grant Alden. He didn't wear flash. He wore restraint. A charcoal overcoat, no visible jewelry. The kind of face people trusted because it looked controlled. But his eyes looked like someone who hadn't slept well in years. He walked past the clinic line without stopping, not because he didn't care, but because he'd trained himself not to look too closely at what would slow him down. Delia watched him, frozen. Ramirez glanced at her, then at the locked drawer, and Delia felt the cruel simplicity of the moment. The note was 10 feet away from its owner, and the system was built to keep it there. As Grant stepped toward the elevators, Rick Haskins appeared on the far side of the lobby, watching Delia like he'd been waiting for exactly this. His hand drifted to his phone. Delia's phone buzzed again. A text message. No name. No number she recognized. Just one line. "Stop digging, Monroe, or you'll lose more than a job." Delia's breath caught, and in the same instant, Grant Alden turned his head slightly as if he'd felt something in the air he couldn't explain. Delia couldn't tell if he'd seen her, but she could tell one thing. Someone had seen her. And whatever was about to happen upstairs, the truth wasn't the only thing racing toward that boardroom. Delia turned back toward the security station so fast her knees almost buckled. Luis Ramirez was still there, but his posture had changed. His shoulders were tighter. His eyes kept flicking to the revolving door like he was waiting for something to walk in and take the air out of the room. And then it did. 2 men in matching dark suits stepped inside. No hospital badges, no warmth. Their earpieces curled behind their ears like quiet threats. One of them carried a tablet with a checklist on it, the kind of checklist that didn't include patients. They walked straight to the security desk. "Ramirez," the taller one said, calm and official, "we're here to assist with executive movement." Ramirez didn't argue. He just nodded once, like arguing would only paint a target on his back. The man's eyes slid to Delia, not curious, not angry, just filing her away. "Who's she?" he asked. Ramirez's voice stayed steady. "Staff. Records." Delia felt the heat rise to her face, then drain out. She didn't want to look guilty. She didn't want to look scared. But the truth was, she was both. The second man stepped closer to the desk, his hand already reaching toward the locked drawer. "We'll take anything meant for Mr. Alden." Ramirez hesitated for half a beat. Delia saw it. That tiny pause that meant Ramirez was deciding whether to protect himself or protect the moment he'd offered her. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from that unknown number, "Last warning." Delia's throat went tight. She didn't even have to open it. She could feel the message like a weight. The first man noticed the vibration. His eyes dipped to Delia's hand. "Ma'am," he said politely, "executive security needs the area clear." Delia looked at Ramirez, and Ramirez looked back. He didn't shake his head. He didn't nod. He just held her gaze like he was telling her the truth without words. This was getting swept away. Clean shelves. That phrase ran through Delia's mind like a cold wind. She leaned closer to Ramirez and lowered her voice to a whisper. "Please, don't let them take it." Ramirez swallowed. His jaw flexed once. Then he did something small and brave. He opened the drawer just enough to slip the envelope deeper behind a stack of outdated visitor logs. Not hidden perfectly, not safe forever, but not handed over like a piece of mail. The second man didn't notice. He was already scanning other compartments, impatient. Delia realized she couldn't stand here and pray the drawer stayed closed. She needed a second path, a louder kind of quiet. Because if you understood what it costs to do the right thing when you have no power, comment courage. Not for likes, for recognition, for the kind of courage nobody claps for. Delia turned and walked away before anyone could stop her. She kept her pace steady, like she was just another employee moving through a shift. But inside, her heart was pounding like she'd started running. She didn't go to records. She went to the public computer kiosk near the hallway that led to the clinic. It was meant for patient forms and appointment reminders. It was also connected to the network. Delia sat down and stared at the screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She didn't know what the right move was. She only knew what the wrong move was. The wrong move was waiting. She pulled up the photo she had taken of the covenant clause. She zoomed in until Evelyn Alden's signature was clear. Until the words "as a condition of transfer" felt less like legal jargon and more like a lifeline. She clicked print. The printer at the kiosk whirred and groaned like it didn't want to be involved. Delia watched the page slide out. One sheet of paper, one signature, one line that could stop a machine. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. "Rosa!" Delia answered, voice low. "Rosa, I can't—" "Mom," Rosa said, and Delia heard the panic she'd been trying to hide all week. "Mateo's school said if I can't come, they're going to mark it as non-compliance. They're saying something about our address not matching. I told them we didn't move. We didn't move." Delia closed her eyes for a second. Because this was how systems worked. They didn't just crush you in one place. They pressed from every side until you couldn't breathe. "I'll get there," Delia said, though she didn't know how she could be in two places at once. She ended the call and folded the printed page carefully, like it was something delicate. Now, she had the proof. But proof didn't matter if it never reached a human being. Across the lobby, the elevator doors opened again. Grant Alden stepped out of the corridor he'd been walking through with his security team, moving toward a private elevator that would take him straight up to the boardroom floors. His chief of staff walked at his side, tablet in hand, speaking in quick, efficient bursts. Marissa Shaw looked like someone who could hold 5 disasters in her head without spilling any of them. Sharp eyes, clean haircut, no wasted motion. Delia watched Grant pass, and the urge to call his name rose in her chest like a desperate thing. But she didn't. Not because she was afraid of him, because she could feel the cameras in the room even when there weren't any. Because she knew what would happen if she shouted. She'd become the story. The covenant wouldn't. Marissa's voice carried just enough for Delia to catch one phrase as they moved. "No surprises today." Grant didn't answer right away. He gave a small nod, like a man agreeing to something he didn't fully believe in. Delia stood up. She walked toward the service hallway that staff used. The kind of hallway that smelled like bleach and old coffee. The kind of hallway nobody important ever looked down. There was a service elevator tucked behind double doors, marked "Authorized Personnel Only." A janitor pushed a cart through. A nurse hurried past with a stack of charts. No one looked at Delia twice. That was her power. Invisibility. She slipped into the service elevator and pressed the button for the 10th floor. The elevator rose slowly, humming like it was thinking about whether it should help her. Halfway up, it jolted slightly and stopped. Delia's breath caught. Then it continued, as if someone above had hesitated, too. When the doors opened on 10, the atmosphere changed instantly. It was quieter, cleaner, softer carpet, less life. The hallway was lined with framed photos of donors smiling over oversized checks. It felt like a different planet from the clinic line downstairs. Delia stepped out and immediately saw a sign on the wall. "Executive boardroom this way." She followed it. Her mouth was dry. Her palms were damp around the folded paper. At the end of the hall, 2 more security men stood outside double doors. Their suits were better tailored. Their eyes were colder. Delia slowed. One of them lifted a hand. "Can I help you?" Delia forced her voice steady. "I need to deliver a document. It's urgent. It concerns the community care clinic and Evelyn Alden's covenant." The guard's expression didn't change. "You're not on the list." "I'm staff," Delia said. "Records." The other guard glanced down at a clipboard, then back up. "Records isn't delivering anything today." Delia felt her heart beat in her ears. Inside those doors, people were talking about optimization, while patients downstairs were being told to transfer. Inside those doors, they were probably congratulating themselves. Delia leaned in just a fraction. "Please, this isn't politics. It's a condition of transfer if you sign without it." "Ma'am," the first guard interrupted, still polite. "Step away from the door." Delia's mind raced. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't argue her way through, so she did the only thing she could do. She turned and walked back down the hall like she'd been dismissed. But she didn't go back to the elevator. She went to a small alcove where a copier stood next to a cabinet of office supplies, the kind of copier staff used to print agendas and nameplates. Delia slipped the covenant page into the copier and made 2 copies. She took one copy and tucked it deep into her coat, pressed against her ribs. She took the other copy and looked around. A door down the hall opened and a woman stepped out with a stack of folders. She looked overwhelmed, but not cruel, just busy. Delia moved quickly toward her. "Excuse me," Delia said softly. "Are you Marissa Shaw?" The woman paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "Who's asking?" Delia swallowed. "My name is Delia Monroe. I work records, basement archives. I have something that needs to reach Mr. Alden. It's about his mother. It's about the clinic downstairs." Marissa held Delia's gaze for a long second. Then she exhaled, quiet and controlled. "Delia," Marissa said, "I can't have you here." "I know," Delia replied, "but I'm here anyway." Marissa's eyes flicked to the paper in Delia's hand. "Is that—" "It's a covenant clause," Delia said. "Evelyn Alden's signature, condition of transfer. The clinic can't be closed without violating it." Marissa's jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "No one," Delia said. "I found it. It was being discarded." Marissa's expression shifted, not into sympathy, into calculation. "Give it to me," Marissa said, quieter now. Delia hesitated, because handing it over meant losing control of the only proof she had. But keeping it meant it might never reach the man it belonged to. Delia made her choice. She handed Marissa the copy. That was the point of no return, because now she couldn't pretend she didn't do this. Now she couldn't go back to her cart and her quiet shift and act like she never touched the machine. Marissa looked down at Evelyn Alden's signature and went very still. Then she said, almost to herself, "We were told there were no covenants." Delia's voice trembled. "There is." Marissa's eyes lifted. "You understand what you've done?" Delia nodded. "Yes." Marissa took a breath. "Go back downstairs, now." Delia didn't move. "Will you show him?" Marissa's mouth tightened, not unkind but strained. "I will do what I can." Delia started to turn away, and that's when the double doors behind Marissa cracked open. A man stepped out, calm as glass. Adrian Pike. He looked like corporate counsel, not because of his suit, because of the way his eyes held no surprise. He glanced at Marissa's hand, at the paper. Then he looked at Delia and smiled slightly, like he just found a loose thread to pull. "Marissa," Adrian said gently, "is there a problem?" Marissa didn't answer right away. Delia's pulse hammered. Adrian's gaze stayed on Delia. "Who is this?" Delia felt the hallway tilt. Marissa finally spoke. "Staff. Records." Adrian nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion. "Interesting. Records isn't authorized on this floor." Delia tried to keep her voice calm. "I'm delivering something urgent." Adrian stepped closer, still polite. "To who?" "To Mr. Alden," Delia said. Adrian's smile softened. "No surprises today." Marissa's eyes flashed, a warning. Delia realized with a sick clarity that Adrian already knew, not about the covenant, about the idea of it, about anything that could stop the transfer. Adrian turned to Marissa. "I'll take that." Marissa held the paper tighter. "I need to show it to Grant." Adrian's voice stayed smooth. "If it's real, it will go through legal review first." Delia heard Rick Haskins in her head. "Red bin. Out of the building. Clean shelves." Delia spoke before fear could stop her. "Legal is the reason it got thrown away." Adrian's eyes hardened by a fraction. "Excuse me?" Delia felt her hands shake, but she held her ground. "Someone is trying to erase it." A beat of silence passed. Adrian looked at Marissa again, and his calm turned into quiet authority. "Marissa, please!" Marissa's jaw clenched, and Delia could see the war inside her. Loyalty to the schedule, loyalty to the truth, loyalty to the man she protected from surprises. Then Marissa did something small and decisive. She slid the paper into a folder and tucked it under her arm like it belonged there. Adrian's smile disappeared. "Delia Monroe," Adrian said, voice still gentle, "you need to leave this floor immediately." Delia didn't argue. She started walking back toward the elevator, heart pounding. But she knew something now. Marissa wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the smooth voice that wanted everything to go through review. Delia stepped into the service elevator. The doors closed. And just before they did, she saw Adrian turn slightly, pull out his phone, and speak one quiet sentence. "Clean shelves." The elevator dropped. When it opened on the main floor, 2 HR staff were waiting near the hallway to records. One of them held a folder. Rick Haskins stood behind them, arms crossed, satisfied. The HR woman spoke in a rehearsed tone. "Ms. Monroe, you are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending review for policy violations." By noon, administrative leave had already been rewritten into termination. Delia's knees felt weak. "Effective now," the woman added. Delia stared at the folder like it was a weapon, and then she saw Ramirez across the lobby. His face had gone pale, because he knew what this meant. Delia looked down at her phone. Another text from the unknown number. "You should have stayed invisible." Delia's throat tightened as a hospital security guard stepped forward, ready to escort her out like she was dangerous. Upstairs, behind glass and carpet and polite language, Marissa Shaw walked into the boardroom, folder in hand. Grant Alden turned his head toward her. Marissa didn't raise her voice. She just said, steady and low, "There's a clause that could stop the transfer." Grant's expression tightened. "What clause?" Marissa held his gaze. "And someone is trying to deliver a message from your mother." Grant went very still. Not angry, just affected. As if a door inside him had cracked open and he didn't know what would come through. And Delia, standing in the lobby with an HR folder in her face, realized the worst part. The truth was finally climbing. But she might not be allowed to stay long enough to see it reach the top. And as she was led toward the doors, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone wasn't just trying to close a clinic, they were trying to erase a woman's last words. Up on the 10th floor, the air felt expensive in a way that didn't comfort anyone. The boardroom was all glass and matte wood, the kind of room built to make hard decisions look clean. A long table, polished water carafes, a wall of screens already lit up with a deck titled Service Optimization and Transition Alignment. Grant Alden sat at the head of the table with his jacket still on, as if the day was moving too fast for him to even take it off. Across from him, Adrian Pike had his laptop open and his voice set to that calm, precise tone lawyers use when they want panic to stay out of the room. Marissa Shaw stood near the screen, not seated, tablet pressed against her hip, a posture that said she had learned to be the first wall between Grant and chaos. No surprises today, she had told him downstairs, but now she was holding one. On the screen, bullet points marched forward like they were inevitable. Relocation pathway, partner clinic integration, credentialed staffing shift, brand consolidation. Cold language for a warm place that was about to be squeezed until it stopped breathing. A project lead clicked to the next slide. "We're already seeing early compliance," he said. "We've reduced walk-in volume by redirecting non-essential intake to alternate locations." Grant's fingers tapped once on the table. "Redirecting," he repeated. "Yes," the project lead said, quickly. "It's a temporary hardship for long-term efficiency." Grant looked out at the city for a second, as if he needed distance from his own room, then he turned back. "How many are being turned away?" he asked. The project lead hesitated. Not long. Just enough to show he'd hoped nobody would ask. Adrian slid in smoothly. "The language here matters," he said. "No one is being denied care. They are being routed to appropriate providers under the partnership structure." Marissa's eyes flicked toward Grant. That tiny flick was a question. "Do you hear what he's doing?" Grant's mouth tightened. He didn't like euphemisms, but he also didn't like friction in front of his team. He was a man who'd spent years believing momentum was the same thing as progress. "Okay," he said, "but I want numbers." The project lead nodded quickly and moved on before he had to answer. The slides kept rolling and the clock kept shrinking. Then Marissa stepped forward. "Before we go any further," she said, voice steady, "there's a covenant clause tied to the clinic property." The room barely reacted at first. They were trained not to. Adrian didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. "We've reviewed all known agreements," Adrian said calmly. "There is no binding covenant that prevents transition." Marissa didn't back up. "This one has Evelyn Alden's signature." That name changed the air. Grant didn't move right away. He just stared at Marissa like she'd said something in a language he hadn't heard in years. "My mother," he said quietly. Marissa nodded. "Yes." Adrian's tone stayed even. "Marissa, with respect, legacy documents can be interpreted. It depends on enforceability. It depends on scope. It depends on whether the covenant is attached to the parcel deed or merely referenced in internal correspondence." Grant finally leaned forward. "Show me." Marissa hesitated for half a beat. Then she opened the folder just enough to reveal a photocopy. Not the original, not the envelope, but the signature was there. The ink curve of Evelyn Alden's name captured in black and white. Grant's chest went tight in a way that annoyed him because it wasn't logical. He didn't have many memories of his mother in boardrooms. He had memories of her in quieter places, a kitchen table, a lamp left on, her handwriting on grocery lists that always ended with the same reminder, "Don't forget the people." He stared at that signature like it was a ghost that had learned how to use paper. Adrian slid his hand toward the folder. Not aggressive, just inevitable. "We need to route this through legal review," he said. "If we bring unverified documents into this meeting, it becomes a liability." Grant's eyes lifted. "Unverified?" Adrian didn't blink. "We don't know the chain of custody." Grant looked at Marissa. "Where did you get it?" Marissa's voice stayed careful. "It was brought to my attention." That was the truth, and also not the whole truth. Grant felt something sharp under his ribs, a suspicion, small but dangerous. "Who brought it?" he asked. Marissa didn't answer fast enough. Adrian answered for her. "Someone from records was discovered acting outside policy." Grant's jaw tightened. "Discovered?" "Approaching the executive corridor," Adrian said, "attempting to deliver materials without authorization." Grant heard the words, but his focus snagged on a deeper thing: records, his mother's signature. Approaching the executive corridor. That didn't sound like a threat. That sounded like desperation. He glanced at the slide on the screen again. Relocation pathway. He didn't like how neat the words were. He didn't like how quickly his mother's name was being folded into procedure. "Pause the deck," he said. The clicking stopped. Grant looked directly at Adrian. "You're telling me this covenant is irrelevant?" "I'm telling you," Adrian replied, "it is not currently recognized as a binding barrier. And even if it were, there are interpretive strategies. We can comply in spirit without complying in form." That sentence landed wrong. Grant sat back, slower now. "Comply in spirit," he repeated, "without complying in form." Adrian smiled faintly. "It's a standard approach." Marissa watched Grant carefully, like she could feel something shifting under the table before it reached the surface. Grant didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Bring me the original." Adrian's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "We don't have the original." Grant's gaze sharpened. "Then find it." Downstairs, Delia Monroe was being escorted out of the building like she'd stolen something. Her badge had stopped working. Her email had already been disabled. Rick Haskins had made sure she heard the phrase "pending review" at least 3 times. Like repetition could turn her into a problem on paper. Outside, the winter air cut into her lungs. She stood on the sidewalk holding a folder she hadn't asked for, feeling like she'd been erased with a stamp. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't the unknown number, it was her landlord. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight. A second later, a voicemail dropped. She listened anyway. "Ms. Monroe, this is Harbor Point Property Management. Your rent is past due. If we don't receive payment by end of week, we will proceed with notice." Delia's knees felt weak. She leaned against the brick wall of the hospital like it might hold her up. She thought of Rosa's voice, the school, the paperwork, Mateo's lunchbox, the way the system always found the softest part of you. She forced herself to move. By the time she reached Mateo's school, her breath was thin and fast. The front office smelled like copier ink and sanitizer. A secretary looked up at Delia with polite exhaustion. "Can I help you?" Delia pulled out the forms Rosa had texted her. Address verification, emergency contact updates, a warning letter printed with too much confidence. The secretary's eyes flicked over the paperwork. "We have a compliance issue," she said, like she was reading from a script. Delia's hand shook slightly as she slid over her lease copy. "We didn't move," she said softly. "We're just behind on some mail." The secretary hesitated. We also have a note here about employment status. Delia froze. What? The secretary looked uncomfortable now. It flagged in the system. It says your employment is under review. Delia felt her stomach drop. She didn't even know how the school would know that. But she did know this. Someone wanted her marked. Someone wanted her framed as unstable, unreliable, problematic. And if she lost Mateo's school placement, Rosa would collapse under it. They were already balancing on a thin wire. Delia swallowed and kept her voice steady. I'm still here, she said, and he's still a child who needs school. The secretary looked at her for a long moment. Then she lowered her voice. Let me see what I can do. Delia stood there, waiting, feeling time bite at her heels. Outside the office window, she saw Mateo on the playground, bundled in a puffy coat, laughing with a kind of freedom that didn't know how close the ground was. Delia's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, clean shelves. Her hands went cold. Back at the clinic, Dr. Nora Patel was already watching the damage unfold. It wasn't dramatic. That was the worst part. It was quiet. A patient at the front desk being told, "We can't refill that here anymore." A mother being redirected to a facility 2 bus transfers away. A man with shaking hands staring at a clipboard like it had personally betrayed him. Nora stepped out into the hallway and saw Delia outside the building entrance later that afternoon. Still clutching papers, still looking like she'd been punched by bureaucracy. Nora walked straight to her. "Delia," she said, voice low. "What happened?" Delia tried to answer, but all that came out was a breath and a shake of her head. Nora didn't press. She just stood closer, shoulder to shoulder, the way people do when they're trying to keep you from falling. "It started," Nora said. "They're already refusing people." Delia's eyes tightened. They said nothing would change yet. Nora let out a single humorless breath. They always say that. If you're feeling that in your chest right now, comment, "This is wrong." Because some things don't need debate. They just need witnesses. Nora glanced around, making sure no one was listening too closely. Then she leaned in. "I need to tell you something," she said. Delia looked at her. Nora's voice dropped even lower. "Someone accessed archived files last night." Delia's stomach clenched. "What?" Nora nodded once. "Our IT vendor flagged unusual access to old records, covenant-related indexes, scanned attachments, things nobody touches unless they're looking for something." Delia felt her hands shake again. "Who?" Nora's eyes didn't soften. They sharpened. "An account tied to legal review permissions. Not a clinician, not a nurse, someone with corporate-level access." Delia's mind snapped back to Adrian Pike's calm voice upstairs, to the way he'd said review like it meant erase. Nora continued, "And this morning, I went to print a medication exception letter. The system kicked me out. Then a man I've never met showed up and asked for my patient intake logs, like he owned the building already." Delia swallowed hard. "They're cleaning shelves." Nora stared at her. "What did you just say?" Delia didn't answer. She couldn't explain the feeling, the pattern, the way certain phrases weren't just words, they were commands. Up on the 10th floor, Marissa Shaw walked quickly through the executive hallway, the folder still under her arm like it was something fragile. Adrian Pike matched her pace without looking rushed. "You shouldn't have brought that into the room," he said. Marissa didn't stop. "Grant asked to see it." Adrian's smile was thin. "Grant is emotional about his mother. That is not a strategy." Marissa finally turned to him. "And erasing her signature is?" Adrian's eyes held hers. "We are protecting the company." Marissa's jaw tightened. "We're protecting the transfer," she corrected. Adrian's gaze flicked toward the office doors ahead. "Words matter," he said softly, and then he added, "Clean shelves." Marissa felt something cold roll through her stomach. Grant's assistant appeared at the end of the hall. "Mr. Alden needs you inside," she said. "Now." Marissa stepped into Grant's office. Grant stood by the window, City behind him, hands in his pockets like he was holding himself down. He didn't turn right away. "Who is she?" he asked. Marissa didn't pretend. "Delia Monroe. Records." Grant's voice stayed quiet. "Why would Records risk their job to chase a covenant clause?" Marissa took a breath. "Because it was being discarded." Grant turned slowly now. His eyes were sharper than they had been in the boardroom. "Discarded by who?" Marissa hesitated. And in that hesitation, Grant understood something that made his spine go stiff. Someone in his own building had decided what his mother's name was worth. Adrian stepped in behind Marissa like he belonged there. "We're handling it," Adrian said smoothly. Grant didn't look at him. He looked at Marissa. "Get me the full transition packet," Grant said. "It's already in your inbox," Adrian replied. Grant crossed to his desk, clicked open the email, and scrolled quickly. Pages, attachments, a timeline built like a trap. His cursor stopped on a signature block near the end. The document was labeled Transfer Authorization Summary. And there it was. A second name. Not his. Howard Alden. His father. Grant felt the room tilt. He hadn't expected his father anywhere near this. Not after the way his mother had fought to keep certain things separate. Not after the silence that had settled between them like dust. He stared at the name until the letters blurred. Then he looked up, voice very still. "Why is my father's name on this?" Adrian's face didn't change fast enough. Marissa's eyes widened just slightly. And Grant realized the truth was bigger than a clinic. It was family. It was legacy. It was betrayal disguised as paperwork. Down on the street, Delia stood outside the clinic with Nora beside her and listened as another voicemail came in from Harbor Point Property Management. This one wasn't a warning. This one was a notice. Her rent was due. Her job was frozen. Mateo's school was watching. And somewhere above her, a billionaire had just discovered his father's name on a transfer built on his mother's signature. The system wasn't just squeezing a clinic, it was moving to erase anyone who tried to stop it. And the worst part was, it was doing it quietly. At the end of the day, Delia walked home with the folder still in her hand, feeling the cold settle into her bones. She didn't know yet that Grant Alden had finally stopped calling it optimization. He was starting to call it what it was, and he was about to pull on the one thread nobody wanted him to see. Because when a system starts cleaning shelves, it never stops at paperwork. It moves on to people. Grant Alden closed his office door and didn't sit down. He stood behind his desk like the room needed to feel smaller before he could think. The skyline outside his window looked the same as it always did, but something underneath it had shifted. A signature, his mother's name, his father's name, and a lawyer's calm voice trying to sand it all down into interpretation. Marissa Shaw waited near the door, still holding herself like a gatekeeper. But now, the gate wasn't keeping people out. It was keeping truth in. "Tell me exactly what happened downstairs," Grant said. Marissa's throat moved. Delia Monroe tried to bring a sealed envelope up from Records. She was stopped before she reached the elevator bank. By who? Security, initially. Then corporate stepped in. They treated it like contraband. Grant's eyes narrowed. Contraband. Paper. Marissa didn't argue. Adrian said she was acting outside policy. Grant stared at the desk for a moment, then looked up with a new kind of focus. I want an audit. Quiet. Internal. No email chain that can be forwarded. Marissa blinked. On what? On access logs, Grant said. Every archive file touched in the last 2 weeks, especially anything labeled covenant, deed, clinic property, foundation charter, and I want print logs, queue history, off-hours sign-ins, everything. Marissa hesitated. If Adrian hears, he won't, Grant cut in, voice low, because you're not going through legal. You're going through systems, and you're going through me. Something flickered in Marissa's face. Relief, maybe, or fear, or both. Grant stepped closer. And I want the original envelope, not a photocopy, not a screenshot. The original. Marissa shook her head slowly. Ramirez had it in a tray. But when I went back, go again, Grant said. Now. Marissa didn't move fast enough to hide the fact that she didn't love being told twice. Grant's tone softened just a fraction. Marissa, please. If my mother signs something, I need to see it with my own eyes, before anyone decides it doesn't matter. Marissa nodded once, then she left. Grant stayed standing, hands braced on the desk, and opened the transfer packet again. He scrolled until he found his father's name, printed clean and unbothered at the bottom of a document that claimed to be routine. Howard Alden. His father had always been a man who knew how to make things look routine. Grant clicked into the attached vendor list, then the partnership structure, then the holding entities. He wasn't looking for drama, he was looking for the quiet fingerprints of ownership. And there, tucked into a line item that most people would skim, he saw it. Alden Meridian Development Group. It was his father's world. Real estate, consolidation, revitalization. That particular language that pretended displacement was progress. Grant's jaw tightened. He didn't hate his father. He'd spent years trying not to feel anything about him at all, but now he felt something he hadn't expected. Betrayal. Not loud, not cinematic. Administrative. Down on the street, Delia Monroe walked into an HR conference room and felt the air thicken. The table was too clean. The chairs were too aligned. The wall had a framed poster about workplace culture that looked like it had never been read. Across from her sat a woman in a navy blazer with an expression that didn't change. Beside her sat Rick Haskins, hands folded, gaze neutral like he was watching a train schedule. A third chair held a man Delia didn't recognize. He had a laptop open and a pen already in his hand, as if the outcome was pre-written. Delia, the HR woman began, this is an administrative meeting regarding policy violations. Delia kept her voice steady. What violations? The man with the pen answered. Unauthorized access to legacy documents, attempted dissemination, disruptive behavior near executive spaces. Delia stared at him. I work in records. The HR woman nodded as if Delia had said something adorable. Your role does not authorize you to engage leadership without proper channels. Delia swallowed. I followed proper channels. I documented it. I sealed it. I routed it. And someone told me to throw it away. Rick's eyes flicked up. Delia caught it. That flick wasn't anger. It was recognition. The HR woman slid a single page across the table. It was a termination notice. It used soft words like immediate separation and security protocols. But Delia's eyes landed on the line that mattered. Employee deemed unreliable as a witness to compliance processes. Delia's skin went cold. Witness. She looked up slowly. This isn't about policy, she said. The man with the pen smiled faintly. This is about protecting the organization. Delia leaned forward. "No," she said quietly. "This is about silencing me." Rick finally spoke. "Delia, sign the acknowledgement. It doesn't admit wrongdoing, it just confirms receipt." Delia looked at the paper and felt the trap inside it. Receipt today, confession tomorrow, a story written without her consent. "What happens if I don't sign?" Delia asked. The HR woman's voice stayed calm. "Then we proceed without your acknowledgement, and security escorts you out." Delia exhaled slowly, forcing air through her chest. "Do I get a copy of the incident report?" The man with the pen replied without looking up. "Internal documents are not shared." Delia's hands tightened in her lap. That was the point. She wasn't supposed to have anything in writing. She wasn't supposed to bring anything into daylight. She stood up. "I'm not signing," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "Because you're trying to make me disappear on paper." Rick's expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped once against the table, a small tell he couldn't fully control. Delia turned to the door and found a uniformed security guard already waiting outside. The system didn't raise its voice. It just removed you. When Delia stepped back into the cold, her phone buzzed again. It was her landlord. She didn't answer. She couldn't, not with her throat closing the way it was. A voicemail dropped anyway. "This is your final reminder," the message said. "We will issue notice by end of week." Delia stood on the sidewalk, job gone, rent due, and a child waiting for her at home who still believed grown-ups kept the world stable. If you've ever been that close to losing everything, comment "hold on." Not because it's a slogan, because sometimes it's the only thing left to say. Across town, Dr. Nora Patel sat alone in her office with the lights off. She had patients to see, charts to sign, a clinic to keep upright. But she was staring at a single printout she'd pulled from the IT vendor's alert list, archive access report. Most of it was boring, routine, except for one line. The account name was generic, a service credential meant to look harmless, transition review. But the access time wasn't harmless, after midnight, and the originating device wasn't on the clinic network. It was remote, routed through a corporate secure tunnel. Nora's fingers tightened around the page. She didn't know much about corporate power, but she knew enough about medicine to recognize deliberate behavior. Somebody had gone digging. Somebody had been cleaning shelves. Nora folded the page, put it in an envelope, and drove to Delia's apartment herself. Delia opened the door with her coat still on and her eyes still raw, as if she hadn't had a second to breathe since HR pushed her out. Nora didn't waste words. She handed Delia the envelope. "What is this?" Delia asked. "A ladder," Nora said quietly. "One rung. Not enough to win, but enough to climb." Delia opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was the report highlighted in two places, account name, timestamp, and a note Nora had written in clear handwriting. "Print logs exist. Queue number ends in 7. Ask systems for the job history." Delia stared at it. She felt something move in her chest that wasn't hope yet. But it was close. "They accessed it last night," Delia whispered. Nora nodded. "And this morning, they started turning people away. That's not a plan. That's a chokehold." Delia looked up. "Why are you helping me?" Nora's voice stayed steady. "Because I've watched too many people get erased by paperwork, and because your son deserves a mother who isn't forced into silence." Delia swallowed hard. Then she looked down at the page again and realized something else. This wasn't just proof. It was a sign she wasn't crazy. She wasn't problematic. She was inconvenient. And the system only labels you when it's afraid you'll be believed. Back at headquarters, Marissa Shaw arrived at records and found the trays empty. Not just moved, clean. The desk where Ramirez had kept incoming items looked wiped down like someone had erased fingerprints. Ramirez himself stood behind the counter with his shoulders tight and his eyes on the floor. Marissa stepped closer. "Ramirez, I need the sealed envelope from this morning." Ramirez shook his head quickly, too quickly. "No envelope," he said. "Nothing came through." Marissa lowered her voice. "Look at me." Ramirez's eyes lifted for half a second, then dropped again. He was scared. Marissa leaned in. "Someone told you to say that." Ramirez swallowed. "They said if I made trouble, they'd say I violated chain of custody. They said I'd lose my pension." Marissa felt her stomach turn. The shelves weren't just being cleaned, people were being trained to lie. "Who?" she asked. Ramirez hesitated. Then in a whisper that barely left his mouth, he said, "Legal courier, black badge, didn't give a name." Marissa's eyes hardened. "Show me the camera angle," she said. Ramirez shook his head. Cameras were down. Maintenance. Marissa let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Convenient. She scanned the counter anyway, eyes moving fast. Nothing. Then she noticed a small detail almost too stupid to matter. A single sheet of paper stuck halfway under the keyboard tray. Not a covenant, not a contract, a print job receipt. She slid it out carefully. It had a timestamp, a printer ID, and a job code. Q number ending in 7, a tiny administrative mistake, a breadcrumb left behind by someone who thought no one would look down. Marissa folded it into her pocket and walked out without saying another word. Upstairs, Grant Alden stared at his mother's foundation charter, pulled from an old file cabinet he hadn't opened since her funeral. He wasn't searching for comfort. He was searching for intent. In the back of the folder, behind donor letters and meeting minutes, he found a handwritten addendum. His mother's handwriting. Not the neat cursive from public letters. The sharper, faster script she used when she was writing for herself. Grant held the page like it might break. The sentence was simple, and it changed the shape of the whole story. If Howard ever tries to touch this clinic, the covenant must stop him. Grant's breath caught. It wasn't only philanthropy, it was protection. Protection from his father. Grant's hand tightened around the paper. Downstairs, Delia sat at her kitchen table with Nora's report spread out beside her and a termination notice folded like a threat. Mateo slept in the next room. Rosa's breathing wheezed softly from the couch where she dozed off with the television on low, trying to pretend she wasn't afraid. Delia looked at the phrase on her termination notice again. Unreliable as a witness. And suddenly she understood the cruelty of it. They weren't just firing her. They were preemptively discrediting her. So when the clinic cried out, the record keeper would already be labeled unstable. Delia's phone buzzed with a new email notification from a generic corporate address. Incident report filed. She opened it and read the subject line, and her hands went numb. Allegation. Unauthorized removal of sensitive materials. Delia stared at the screen and realized they were building a case, not to punish her, to keep her quiet. At the exact same moment, high above the city, Marissa stepped back into Grant's office with a folded receipt in her pocket and fear in her eyes. And Grant Alden stood at his window holding his mother's handwritten warning like a match in a dry room. He turned when Marissa entered. "There's a clause," he said quietly. "And it wasn't meant to protect the company. It was meant to protect the clinic from my father." Marissa's eyes widened. Grant's voice lowered further. "And they tried to erase it." Marissa swallowed. "They're also trying to erase Delia." Grant's jaw clenched. He didn't say it out loud yet, but inside him, something had already crossed a line, because if his mother had written a covenant like a shield, then the man holding the sword wasn't a stranger, it was family. And now Grant had to decide whether he was going to be the kind of son who honored a signature or the kind who let it be cleaned off the shelf. And somewhere in the building, someone was still moving fast, still deleting quietly, still hoping the truth would arrive too late. Delia Monroe woke up to the kind of silence that felt expensive in the wrong way. Not peaceful, not restful, just empty. Her phone was face down on the kitchen table, like she could pretend it wasn't there. Like she could keep the world from reaching her by refusing to look at it. But the world didn't need permission. It knocked anyway. A sharp, official knock. 2 beats, then a pause, then another 2. Delia opened the door and found a man in a tan coat holding a clipboard. He didn't look cruel. That was almost worse. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "I'm here to post notice." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just taped a paper to the frame like it belonged there, like her life was a bulletin board. Delia stared at the words and felt her stomach drop. Notice. To cure or quit. It wasn't eviction yet. It was the step before it. The step that told you the world was already leaning in that direction. "I can pay," Delia heard herself say, even though she wasn't sure anymore if that was true. The man gave a small, tired nod. "You have until end of week." End of week. 4 words that turned everything into a countdown. When Delia shut the door, she didn't cry. She stood there for a second, palm against the wood, breathing like she was trying to keep her ribs from collapsing. Then her phone lit up, a school number. She answered on the second ring because she didn't get to be scared when it came to Mateo. "Ms. Monroe," a woman's voice said, careful and polite. "We need updated residency documentation for Mateo's file." Delia blinked. "Why?" There was the smallest pause, the kind that told you the other person wished they didn't have to say the next part. "We received an alert that your employment status changed," the woman said. "And we have to confirm his address for continued enrollment." Delia looked toward the hallway where Mateo's backpack leaned against the wall. A small dinosaur keychain hung off the zipper, swinging slightly like it was still alive with yesterday's motion. "Please don't do this," Delia whispered before she could stop herself. The woman softened. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm telling you what the system requires." The system. Always the system. Delia thanked her, because she was raised to be polite even when she was bleeding, and ended the call with her thumb shaking. Then a third call came through. Unknown number. Delia almost didn't answer. Almost. But something in her chest told her that if she didn't pick up, the next step wouldn't be a call at all. "This is corporate investigations," a man's voice said, "regarding an allegation of removal of sensitive materials." Delia's mouth went dry. "That's not... You are instructed not to contact any external auditors, regulators, or third parties about internal documents," he continued, like he was reading from a script. "Any attempt to interfere will be considered obstruction." Delia gripped the phone harder. "I didn't remove anything. I tried to report a covenant." Silence. Then the man said, calmer now, almost gentle, "Ms. Monroe, the record states you acted outside policy. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Delia understood perfectly. They weren't just firing her. They were building a fence around her mouth, and they were putting it up right before someone important arrived to ask questions. "How do you know there's an auditor coming?" Delia asked quietly. Another pause. Then, "You've been informed incorrectly. Goodbye." The line went dead. Delia stared at the phone like it might explain itself. Like a black screen could tell her how a person was supposed to survive when paperwork turned into a weapon. In the other part of the city, Dr. Nora Patel stood in the clinic hallway watching a mother clutch her child's inhaler like it was the last thing keeping him in the world. "We can't refill it today," the pharmacy tech said, eyes apologetic. "The system is rejecting it." Nora stepped forward. "Try again," she said, calm but firm. The tech tried again. Denied. Nora looked at the screen and felt something in her chest harden, not anger, resolve. "Why?" the mother asked, her voice thin. "He needs it." Nora swallowed. "We're working on it." But the truth was, working on it didn't open the locked doors. It just kept you from screaming in front of strangers. All morning it went like that. A man with a cane turned away because his appointment didn't exist anymore. A woman with a paper bag of medications told her coverage changed overnight. A teenager, quiet and pale, asked if the clinic was closing, and Nora didn't know what to say without breaking something inside herself. The changes weren't theoretical. They were already hurting people. And somewhere in the background, someone was still pretending this was optimization. Nora retreated to her office and pulled up the access report again. She stared at the account name and timestamp like she could burn it into memory. Transition review after midnight. Then she checked the clinic's internal messages. A new note from administration sat at the top. All staff are reminded, do not discuss transition matters with outside parties. Outside parties. That was how the system talked about truth. Nora's hands tightened on her desk. Delia Monroe was being silenced, and patients were being erased. So Nora did the only thing she could do that still felt like medicine. She documented everything. In Grant Alden's office, the air had changed too. Not because the room looked different. It didn't. Because Grant was different in it. He had Marissa Shaw in front of him, a systems director on speaker, and a single question he kept asking over and over until it stopped sounding like business and started sounding like a son trying to understand his own house. "Who accessed my mother's covenant files last night?" Grant asked. The systems director, Keisha Vaughn, cleared her throat. "Those are legacy archives. Access requires elevated permission." Grant's voice stayed even. "And yet, someone accessed them." Keisha hesitated. "There was a maintenance ticket. Camera outage in records and archive corridor." Grant stared at his desk. "Of course there was." Marissa pulled the crumpled print receipt from her pocket and slid it across the desk like it weighed more than paper should. Grant looked at it. "Q ending in 7, he murmured. Keisha's tone sharpened. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" Grant asked. A pause. Then Keisha said quietly, "I can trace print job history. But if someone flagged this as legal hold, access may be restricted." Grant's eyes lifted. "Who can flag it?" Keisha didn't answer for a second. Then, carefully, "Corporate counsel can request it. Adrian Pike." Grant didn't say the name out loud, but Marissa saw it land anyway. "Do it," Grant said. "Trace it now and send it only to me." Keisha hesitated. "Grant." "Now," Grant repeated, still calm. That was the dangerous part. When Grant Alden got quiet, the world tended to move. When the call ended, Marissa exhaled slowly. "He's cleaning shelves," she said. Grant didn't correct her. He didn't pretend anymore that this was about messy office politics. He opened his mother's folder again and pulled out the handwritten addendum he'd found. "If Howard ever tries to touch this clinic, the covenant must stop him." Under it, in smaller writing, like she was leaving a warning for the version of her son who might be too late. Do not trust compliance when Howard is involved. They will call it policy. It will be pressure. Grant's throat tightened. His mother had known. She'd seen the machine. She tried to build a guardrail. And now the machine was pretending the guardrail didn't exist. Grant looked at Marissa. "Get Adrian in here." Marissa blinked. "Right now?" Grant nodded. "Right now, before he files anything else." A few minutes later, Adrian Pike walked in like he belonged to the building more than the people inside it. He carried a slim folder. No panic, no sweat. The kind of calm that came from thinking you had already won. "Grant," Adrian said politely, "we need your signature on the transition package. The clock is tight." Grant gestured to the chair. "Sit." Adrian sat. Grant didn't open the folder. He didn't look at the package. He looked at Adrian. "Tell me something simple," Grant said. "Who requested the maintenance outage in records last night?" Adrian's expression didn't change. "I'm not sure what you mean." Grant nodded slightly, like he expected that answer. "Second question, who flagged the Legacy Archive access as a legal hold?" Adrian's mouth softened into a faint smile. "Those are internal procedural matters, not relevant to the transition." Grant leaned back. "Not relevant," he repeated, voice quiet. "That's interesting." Adrian adjusted his cuff. "Grant, your board expects continuity. This clinic transfer is part of a broader community initiative. Any delay raises liability." Grant kept his eyes on him. "Liability for who?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. Grant let the silence stretch. He didn't fill it with ego. He filled it with pressure. Then he asked, "Did you speak to HR about Delia Monroe?" Adrian's gaze flickered for the first time. "Delia Monroe is a former employee who violated policy." Grant's jaw tightened. "She tried to deliver a covenant." Adrian's voice stayed smooth. She attempted to bypass chain of custody and create risk. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Risk to who?" Another pause. Adrian cleared his throat. "To the organization." Grant nodded slowly, then slid his mother's handwritten note across the desk. Adrian glanced at it once, and the calm in his face tightened just a fraction. Not fear, calculation. Grant watched him. "My mother wrote that," he said softly. "She wrote it like she was protecting someone." Adrian placed the paper down carefully, like it might stain his hands. "Grant, I respect your mother deeply, but handwritten notes do not override signed agreements." Grant's voice lowered. "Unless the covenant contains a reversion clause." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "Where did you hear that?" Grant didn't answer. He asked another question instead. "How long do I have before this transfer becomes irreversible?" Adrian smiled again, but it wasn't as relaxed now. "We're scheduled to file by close of business. If we miss the window, we risk donor confidence. We risk litigation." Grant stared at him. "So I have hours." Adrian's tone softened, almost fatherly. "Grant, this is not the time for surprises." Grant looked at Marissa, and Marissa felt a chill, because Grant didn't look like a man preparing to sign. He looked like a man preparing to stop something. Down on the street, Delia sat on the edge of her couch with the eviction notice beside her and Mateo's school form in her lap. Rosa shuffled in from the kitchen, clutching her inhaler, eyes tired. "Who was on the phone?" Delia tried to smile. It didn't land. "Just people." Rosa sat carefully, like her body had learned not to trust furniture. "Delia, what's happening?" Delia swallowed. "I don't know. I just know they're trying to make me look like I did something wrong." Rosa's eyes narrowed the way older women's eyes do when they've seen too many systems chew up decent people. "Because you saw something." Delia's throat tightened. She nodded. Rosa reached over and covered Delia's hand with her own. "Then don't let them take your voice." Delia's phone buzzed again. An email. Subject line: "Notice of investigation. Cooperation required." She opened it and felt her chest go hollow. It wasn't just a warning. It was a command. It stated that, due to allegations of misconduct, Delia was prohibited from contacting any external auditor or participating in any review process. And at the bottom, one line sat like a knife placed neatly on a table. "An independent audit is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. They weren't trying to stop her from talking someday. They were trying to stop her from talking when it mattered. If you've ever watched the world try to bury the person telling the truth, comment, "Don't give up." Not for Delia, for yourself. For the part of you that knows silence is how they win. High above the city, Grant Alden stood alone again, holding his mother's warning in one hand and the transition packet in the other. Two futures, two choices. Marissa returned with her phone in her hand, eyes wide. "Keisha traced the print job," she said. "Q ending in 7. Grant looked at her. "Who printed it?" Marissa swallowed. "A legal service account, routed through Adrian's authorization." Grant's jaw clenched. Marissa added, voice lower, "And there's something else. The Covenant file has a reversion trigger. If the clinic is transferred under deceptive compliance conditions, ownership snaps back to the foundation." Delia's eyes caught another line. A reversion clause. If the condition was violated, ownership snapped back. Grant stared at her. "That can stop it." "Yes," Marissa said, "but only before filing. Once it's recorded, it becomes a fight in court." Grant looked at the clock. Hours, not days. And somewhere below, Delia sat with a notice designed to gag her right before the auditor arrived. Grant's voice dropped to a whisper, like he was speaking to the memory of his mother more than the room. "Okay," he said, "then we don't let it get filed." And as he reached for his phone, the question wasn't whether he could stop the transfer. The question was, who would try to stop him first? The first thing Grant Alden did was close his office door and stand still long enough to hear his own breathing. Downstairs in the lobby, the building's air always felt a little colder, like the place was designed to keep people moving, keep them quiet, keep them small. Up here, on the executive floor, the quiet was expensive. Soft carpet, glass walls, a view that made the city look obedient. Grant stared at the skyline and realized something he had never admitted out loud. If he waited for the process would bury the truth. He turned away from the window and called Marissa Shaw. She came in with her tablet tucked against her ribs, eyes already scanning for what might be breaking. Marissa did not panic. She was built to prevent panic. She was the person who kept Grant's world smooth enough that he could pretend nothing ever surprised him. He held her gaze. "Write a pause order," he said. Marissa's fingers hovered above the screen. "A pause order on what, exactly?" "On the filing," Grant said. "Anything tied to the clinic transfer package, anything tied to relocation or optimization. I want the language neutral. No names, no blame, just a hold." Marissa's mouth tightened in a way that meant she understood the risk. "Adrian will ask why." "Let him ask," Grant said. "We're not debating this in a meeting. We're doing it." Marissa nodded once and moved, quick and quiet, like a door shutting on a storm. Grant didn't sit. Sitting felt like surrender. He called Keisha from systems. Keisha answered on the second ring, voice low. I saw the Q thread. You weren't supposed to see that. I was supposed to sign, Grant said. That's what I was supposed to do. Silence. Then her exhale, soft and careful. What do you want from me? I want preservation, Grant said. Full snapshots, print spool logs, access logs, file history, the whole chain, now. Keisha hesitated. If I pull snapshots, someone will notice. Those dashboards are watched. I know, Grant said. So we do it clean. You document it. You timestamp it. You send it through compliance as a systems integrity step. Keisha didn't laugh, but her voice sharpened. That's a lie. It's not, Grant said. If someone is altering records, integrity is the issue. Another pause, then quieter. I can do it, but it will light up like a flare. Grant looked at the corner of his desk, where a framed photo of his mother sat half behind a stack of quarterly reports. She was smiling in that photo, but her eyes had always looked like they were watching for the moment the room stopped being safe. Then let it light, Grant said. Just not yet. When he hung up, he didn't feel powerful. He felt awake. Outside his office, the culture was still humming its favorite phrase like a lullaby. No surprises today. Grant walked out anyway. In the boardroom, Adrian Pike had already staged the day as if it were a performance. The screen glowed with cold, confident slides, words that sounded clean, relocation, efficiency, strategic partnership, the kind of language that made harm feel like math. Marissa stood near the door, face calm, but Grant saw the faint tension in her jaw. She had written the pause order. She was waiting for his signal to send it. Adrian smiled like a man who never lost because he never fought in the open. Grant, he said, warm as polished wood. We're 10 minutes behind. Grant didn't sit. He glanced at the slide and then at Adrian. Before we go further, I have a few questions. Adrian's smile didn't change. Of course, Grant's voice stayed even. Who accessed the clinic's legacy archive last night? A few people shifted, not much, just enough to show they felt the air change. Adrian tilted his head. Legacy archives are accessed all the time for reference. That's normal. Grant nodded slowly, like he was learning something. Then it should be easy to tell me who did it. Adrian's eyes flicked to Marissa, then back to Grant. We can pull that later. Right now, we need to keep momentum. Grant pointed at the bottom corner of the slide. This package includes a clause referencing prior covenants. Where did that clause come from? Adrian's tone stayed gentle. From older foundation documents, standard language. Grant leaned forward just slightly. And who decided it was standard? Adrian opened his mouth. Grant didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I'm issuing a preservation notice, Grant said. Effective immediately. No deletions, no edits, no cleanup. Anything tied to the clinic, the foundation covenant, and the transfer package gets locked. The room didn't explode. It didn't need to. It froze. Marissa tapped her screen. Somewhere in the building, a notice began traveling through systems like a pulse. If you're still here, comment truth. Because the second the machine starts to lock up, you find out who was relying on it to stay loose. Adrian's smile became thinner. Grant, a preservation notice implies litigation. That's extreme. It implies risk, Grant said. And I'm seeing risk. Adrian tried another angle, softer. We are hours away from filing. The consequences of a delay. Grant cut him off with a question, quiet and surgical. Why are you so eager to file today? The room went silent again. Adrian's eyes held steady, but his throat moved with a swallow he didn't expect anyone to notice. Because it's scheduled. Grant nodded. Scheduled by who? Adrian's calm shifted into something else. Something that could almost pass for irritation if you didn't know how trained he was. By the board's timeline. Grant's gaze didn't move. Which board member pushed for the timeline? Marissa's eyes widened a fraction, not because Grant was wrong, because Grant wasn't supposed to ask. Adrian breathed out slowly. Grant, with respect, this isn't productive. No, Grant said. It's just uncomfortable. Behind the glass walls, people outside the room slowed as they passed, sensing the weight in the air. This was not a yelling fight. This was worse. This was a man who owned the building choosing not to pretend anymore. Grant turned slightly toward Marissa. Send it. Marissa's fingers moved. The filing paused. It wasn't announced. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply not moving forward. And the system, for the first time, had to stop pretending it wasn't a system. Down at street level, Delia Monroe felt none of that power. She felt the opposite. Her phone buzzed while she stood in a narrow hallway outside the school office, holding Mateo's folder like it was a life jacket. Rosa sat in the plastic chair beside her, one hand resting on her knee, the other clutching a worn canvas tote. The message on Delia's screen was short. Final notice. Rent balance due. Her stomach tightened so hard it felt like she'd swallowed a stone. Then another message arrived. A different number. Your employer reported an incident. We need to verify your status for school records. Delia stared at it until the words blurred. Mateo's school wasn't just a building. It was his routine, his friends, his sense that life could be normal even when the world wasn't. Rosa leaned closer. What is it, mija? Delia forced air into her lungs. They're using the accusation, she whispered. They're making it follow us. Rosa's hand squeezed her knee. Then we do the right thing. We don't run. Delia wanted to believe that was enough, but the system didn't care about belief. It cared about paper. She stepped into the office when her name was called. The administrator's face was polite in that way that meant they had already decided something. They slid a form across the desk. Just a verification, the woman said, because we received a notice that there may be an ongoing investigation. Delia's mouth went dry. Investigation for what? The administrator hesitated. It says, removal of materials. Delia's fingers curled around the edge of the desk. She could see the chain now. She could feel it. The accusation wasn't meant to punish her only. It was meant to isolate her, to make every official door close before she could knock. Outside the office, Dr. Nora Patel called. Delia answered with shaking hands. Delia, Nora said, voice tight, urgent, human. They denied 3 patients this morning. Not because of medical reasons, because of policy alignment. Someone flipped the intake rules overnight. Delia closed her eyes. They're strangling it. Yes, Nora said. And listen, someone accessed the legacy files again, or tried to. The account pinged and then dropped. Delia's heart jumped. Do you know which account? Nora hesitated. I shouldn't even have this, but one of our nurses saw the system alert. It wasn't a clinic account. It was internal. Delia lowered her voice. Can you send it? I can't send it to you directly, Nora said. They'll say you're tampering, but I can send it to the Ombuds channel. The one posted in the clinic break room. It logs the report without naming you as the receiver. Delia felt a thread of hope, thin but real. A safe path, a way to speak without being caught speaking. Rosa watched her face. Is it good news? Delia nodded once, small. It's a door, she whispered. A real one. Across town, in the tower, Keisha's screens flashed with a warning she hadn't seen in months, an admin request, unauthorized, a rollback attempt. Someone was trying to erase the very trail she was freezing. Keisha's hands moved fast. She captured the snapshot. She tagged it. She routed it into the preservation log. Then her phone lit up with a call she didn't want, a restricted number. She didn't answer, but the voicemail icon appeared seconds later. Keisha listened, face going pale, a man's voice, smooth and calm. Clean shelves. Keisha's stomach turned. Downstairs, Delia's phone buzzed again. A call from the school. She answered and heard a voice she didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Thomas," the man said. "I'm with a contracted verification service. We're just confirming information about Mateo Rojas." Delia's pulse slammed. "Who sent you?" she asked. There was a pause, too long to be innocent. "We're working off a file," the man said. "It's routine." Delia looked at Rosa. Rosa stood up slowly, eyes sharp now, protective in a way that made Delia feel like a kid again. Delia's voice came out steady, even though she felt like she was splitting in half. "You don't contact my grandson without written authorization. Send everything to the Ombud's office. And do not come to the school." Another pause, then softer. "Ma'am, we already—" Delia cut him off. "Do not." She hung up, hands shaking. Up in the boardroom, Adrian's phone buzzed, and for the first time, his composure cracked just slightly as he read a message. Grant saw it. Saw the microsecond of alarm. Grant didn't say, "Gotcha." He didn't gloat. He simply leaned closer and spoke like a man choosing a line he could live with. "I'm not filing today," Grant said. "And until I understand who is touching what, nobody is cleaning anything." Adrian's smile returned, but it was no longer confidence. It was defense. Grant's phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. "Your father's name just surfaced on an alternate transfer channel, off-site, already in motion." Grant's throat tightened. Not a rumor, not a feeling, a second machine. Running outside the building and down at the school, Delia stared at the locked office door and realized something else at the exact same time. Someone was not just trying to silence her. Someone was reaching for her son, and the story was about to stop being polite. By the time Delia stepped out of the school office, the winter air felt sharper than it had an hour ago. Not because the temperature changed, because the world had. Across the parking lot, Mateo's class was lining up to head inside, small backpacks, small shoulders, a teacher with a clipboard, normal life holding itself together with routine. Delia watched her son for one steady breath and told herself one thing. Do not let them make him feel watched. Rosa stood beside her like a quiet wall, the kind of presence that didn't need speeches. Delia's phone buzzed again. A new email, official header, her former employer's logo at the top, crisp and cold. Termination effective immediately. The words didn't land as anger. They landed as gravity. Delia stared at the line about policy violations and removal of materials, and she could feel the story being written about her in rooms she could not enter. A story designed to travel faster than the truth. Rosa took the phone gently from her hand, read it, then handed it back with a small nod. They want you scared, Rosa said, so you'll stay quiet. Delia swallowed. And if I don't? Rosa's eyes lifted toward the school doors. Then they'll try to make you look dangerous. Delia's stomach turned, because she understood exactly what that meant. Not a threat in the alley, a threat in paperwork, a threat that wore a tie. Inside the tower, Grant stood with Marissa Shaw in the hallway outside his office, both of them reading the same message on her tablet. Your father's name just surfaced on an alternate transfer channel. Off-site, already in motion. Grant didn't ask if it was real. He had learned something in the last few hours. If it made his chest tighten, it was real enough to kill people's lives. Where is it moving? Grant asked. Marissa flicked to a second screen. A partnership memorandum routed through Stonebridge Renewal Group. It's framed as a continuity step if the foundation delays. It's already got preliminary signatures. Grant's jaw clenched. Who signed? Marissa hesitated, then spoke carefully. One of our legacy trustees, and your father's counsel. Grant felt the strange, bitter sting of recognizing a pattern. No surprises today. Wasn't just a slogan. It was a weapon. He turned and walked straight into his office, not to hide, but to think in a room where he could hear himself. He picked up the framed photo of his mother and turned it over. There was a date on the back in her handwriting. There was always a date. She never did anything without anchoring it in time, like she knew people would try to erase it later. Grant set the photo down slowly. Marissa, he said, I want the original envelope from Ramirez. Marissa's throat moved. We tried. It's gone. Then I want the last known path, Grant said. Security cameras, desk cameras, lobby cameras, whatever exists. Marissa nodded. Tasha Nguyen in security ops can pull corridor footage, but if clean shelves has already started, there may be gaps. Grant's eyes narrowed. Then we preserve the gaps too. Marissa looked up. That's not how. That's exactly how, Grant said. If someone is deleting, the absence becomes evidence. A knock came at the door. Keisha stepped inside, her face tense in a way that didn't belong to her usual calm. They tried to revoke my access, she said. Grant didn't sit. Who? Keisha shook her head. A request came through as system cleanup, signed off by legal. Adrian's domain. Marissa's hand tightened around her tablet. Keisha continued, voice low. I pulled snapshots before they could lock me out. I routed them into the preservation channel, but someone left me a voicemail. Grant's gaze lifted. What did it say? Keisha swallowed. 2 words. Marissa's eyebrows rose slightly, like she already knew. Keisha looked at Grant. Clean shelves. The room went still, because now it wasn't rumor. It wasn't paranoia. It was a repeated phrase, a shared language, a system revealing itself. Grant felt something settle in his chest, not fear, clarity. Keisha, he said, you did the right thing. Keisha gave a brittle smile. I don't feel like it. Grant nodded once, like he understood. Doing the right thing rarely feels safe at first. Then he turned to Marissa. Get me the Foundation ombuds. Marissa blinked. Elaine Brooks? Now, Grant said. Down at street level, Delia and Rosa sat in the car with the heater running too high because Delia couldn't stop shivering. Not from cold, from what it meant to lose your job in one email while someone called your child's school to verify information. Delia opened the clinic break room photo she had taken weeks ago. A paper taped to the wall, ombudsman hotline, confidential reporting, no retaliation. She hadn't thought she'd ever need it. She had thought people like her didn't get believed. Now she dialed. The line rang twice. A woman answered with a voice that sounded tired in the way of someone who carried other people's fear for a living. This is Elaine Brooks, the woman said. Compliance ombuds, are you safe to talk? Delia's throat tightened. I don't know. Elaine's pause was gentle, not hesitant. Then tell me only what you can. Delia looked at Rosa. Rosa nodded. Delia spoke in short sentences because long sentences made her feel like she was pleading. My name is Delia Monroe. I work records, basement archives. I found an old covenant tied to the clinic. I tried to keep it from being erased. They called it removal of materials. I was terminated today, and someone contacted my grandson's school using that accusation. Elaine's voice sharpened, not with anger, but with focus. Who contacted the school? Delia swallowed. A contracted verification service. They wouldn't tell me who sent them. Elaine exhaled slowly. Okay, listen to me. Do not speak to anyone else from that service. If they show up, you ask for written authorization and you direct them to me. You understand? Delia's eyes burned. I'm just trying to keep my kids safe. I know, Elaine said, and, you're doing it. There was a beat of silence where Delia could hear her own breathing. Then Elaine said, I have another report that connects to yours. Delia's heart jumped. From who? Elaine didn't answer that directly. From inside systems. It confirms someone attempted log deletion. It also confirms a print queue identifier tied to the legacy archive. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw. No emotion, just facts. Delia nodded even though Elaine couldn't see. Okay. She told her about the envelope, the signature, the phrase she heard near the elevator, clean shelves, spoken like a routine. She told her about Ramirez's hands shaking as security took over the desk. And as she spoke, something strange happened. For the first time in days, Delia felt like she wasn't screaming into snow. She was placing bricks, one on top of another. A wall the machine couldn't push through. If you've ever been that close to losing everything because of paperwork and whispers, comment, hold on. Not for the algorithm. For the part of you that still believes quiet courage counts. Back in the tower, Elaine Brooks stood in a small office that nobody prestigious ever visited. No skyline view, no soft carpet, just file cabinets and a coffee mug that said, "Do the right thing." Her phone was pressed to her ear. Grant Alden's voice came through, controlled and low. Elaine, he said, I want this treated as a preservation event. I want whistleblower protections invoked immediately. Elaine didn't flinch at the word whistleblower. She had heard it before, usually too late. I'm already drafting it, she said. But you need to understand something, Grant. The moment we invoke protections, the system will know it's being watched. Grant's voice stayed calm. Good. Elaine paused. You sound different. Grant looked at the photo of his mother again. I feel different, he said. Elaine lowered her voice. Your counsel is going to fight me. Grant's reply was simple. Let them. Elaine hesitated, then spoke the part she didn't usually get to say to men like him. This is going to touch your family. Grant didn't deny it. It already has. Elaine continued. And if your father is linked to an off-site transfer channel, there may be a parallel filing happening right now. Grant's chest tightened again. Where? Elaine read from her screen. Stonebridge Renewal Group, a continuity partnership. It's designed to bypass internal delays. It's not illegal on its face, that's the point. It's legality shaped like a knife. Grant closed his eyes for one breath. Then he opened them. Elaine, he said, I want the filing paused. Elaine's voice turned cautious. We don't have authority to pause a partner's filing without a trigger. Grant's gaze locked on the framed photo. What kind of trigger? He asked. Elaine hesitated. A covenant with restrictive clauses. A conflict of interest, proof of tampering, something that forces a review. Grant's jaw clenched. Then we build the trigger. Marissa entered quietly, tablet in hand, and set it on Grant's desk. "Corridor footage," she said. Grant hit play. The screen showed a hallway near the lobby. Ramirez at his desk. A man in a dark suit leaning in. Not shouting, not grabbing, just speaking close enough to make Ramirez's shoulders shrink. Then security arriving. Hands moving. Papers lifted. The desk cleared. Clean shelves in action. Grant paused the footage on the man's face. Not a stranger. A familiar profile from old Foundation events. A man who always stood near his father. Grant swallowed hard. "That's Martin Vale." Marissa's voice was tight. "Your father's fixer." Grant's throat went dry because the word fixer carried something heavy. It meant this wasn't just business. It was behavior. It was a method. Keisha stepped forward. "There's more." She handed Marissa a printed page, actual paper, because sometimes paper was harder to erase than pixels. At the top was a system record, print job queue ending in 7, time-stamped, routed. And beside it, an internal user ID, not Delia's, not Nora's, not anyone from the clinic. Grant stared at it. "Who is it?" he asked. Keisha's voice dropped. Adrian Pike requested the print, under a delegated authorization tied to Howard Alden Council. Grant's stomach turned. His mother's name had built a clinic. His father's name was trying to move it like a piece on a board. Grant reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, smooth and familiar. "Grant," Howard Alden said. "I was wondering when you'd call." Grant's hand tightened around the phone. "Why is your council pushing an off-site transfer channel?" Grant asked. Howard sighed, like Grant was a child asking why the sky was blue. "Because you're hesitating, and hesitation costs money." "This isn't about money," Grant said. Howard's chuckle was soft. "Everything is about money, son. Even the stories you tell yourself." Grant felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Did you authorize clean shelves?" A pause. Not long, but just long enough. Howard's tone stayed calm. "You're letting a lobby clerk rattle you." Grant's eyes flicked to Delia's termination email on Elaine's forwarded report. His voice went colder. "No," Grant said. "You're letting a lobby clerk expose you." Howard's voice hardened slightly. "Watch your tone." Grant swallowed, then said the sentence that changed the air in the room. "I found Mom's covenant." Another pause, this one longer. And in that silence, Grant heard something he hadn't expected to hear from his father. Not anger, not denial, something closer to calculation. Howard spoke carefully. "Your mother was sentimental." Grant's jaw clenched. She was protective. Howard's voice lowered. "Grant, you're going to embarrass yourself if you keep digging." Grant stared at the photo on his desk and realized his hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. "Dad," Grant said, "I'm going to stop the filing." Howard's tone turned warning soft. "You can't stop what's already in motion." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Watch me." He ended the call, and in the same moment Delia's phone buzzed with a new email from the school. Subject line, verification appointment scheduled. Her heart dropped. Because the machine wasn't just pushing her at work anymore, it was pushing her at home. It was reaching into the one place that was supposed to be safe. Delia looked at Rosa, and her voice cracked just once. "They're coming." Rosa's face tightened. "Then we meet them with paper." Delia swallowed hard and opened Elaine's last message. "Stay available. An auditor is arriving, and we are going to make sure you're heard. Delia stared at that sentence like it was a match in the dark. Up in the tower, Grant turned to Marissa. "Get me the original file box tied to my mother's covenant," he said. "Whatever archive it's in, I want it in my hands." Marissa nodded. "And if Adrian blocks access?" Grant didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Then I'm done asking," he said. And somewhere, off-site, a parallel filing kept moving forward as if it had all the time in the world. But Grant Alden finally understood the truth. It didn't need time. It needed a decision. And he was about to make one. Grant did not storm down the hall. He didn't need volume. He needed leverage. He walked with the kind of quiet speed that made people step out of his way without understanding why. Marissa kept up beside him, tablet hugged to her chest like it could bruise her ribs. "Adrian's in the legal suite," she said. "He's already moving requests through procurement. If he routes the archive under risk containment, we'll lose the box for days." Grant didn't slow. "Then we don't lose it." The legal suite sat behind frosted glass and soft carpet like the building wanted you to forget what happened inside it. A receptionist started to rise, polite smile ready, but Grant's face stopped her mid-breath. "Adrian," Grant said to the assistant who appeared from a side door. "Now." A beat later, Adrian Pike stepped into the corridor as if he had been waiting. Calm tie, calm hands, calm eyes that always looked like they were reading a document you couldn't see. "Grant," Adrian said smoothly, "I heard you had concerns." Grant stared at him for one steady second, long enough to make the silence do its job. "My mother's covenant file," Grant said. "Where is it?" Adrian's expression barely changed. "The covenant is on record." "I'm not asking about the record," Grant said. "I'm asking about the file box, the physical archive, the original clause pages, the handwritten addendum." Marissa's fingers tightened around her tablet. Adrian's voice stayed pleasant. "Physical access requires protocol, chain of custody, risk review." "Risk," Grant repeated softly. "To whom?" Adrian gave a mild smile, like Grant had said something naive. "To the organization, to you, to the foundation." Grant nodded once, as if accepting the words. Then he did what Adrian did not expect. He made it simple. "Who requested the print job queue ending in 7? Grant asked. Adrian blinked. Only once. A small flaw in the smooth surface. "I don't know what you mean," Adrian said. Grant didn't raise his voice. "Keisha has the system record. Your user ID is on it. It routes through delegated authorization tied to my father's counsel." Adrian's smile thinned. "Grant, we're in a sensitive moment. A filing is scheduled. We don't have time for—" "Clean shelves," Grant said. The words landed like a dropped plate. Adrian's face stayed composed, but the air in the corridor changed. Even the receptionist behind the glass looked up, as if she'd heard a name she wasn't supposed to. Grant took one step closer, not threatening, just unavoidable. "You used that phrase," Grant said, "or someone in your orbit did. And I have corridor footage of a man tied to my father leaning over Ramirez's desk while security cleared papers. I have logs showing attempted deletions, and I have an off-site transfer moving through Stonebridge while you tell me we're out of time." Adrian's voice softened, the way people soften when they're trying to steer you away from the truth without pushing. "You're upset," Adrian said, "and I understand. But this is bigger than one clerk's accusation, bigger than one clinic." Grant's eyes narrowed. "It's not bigger than the truth." Adrian held Grant's gaze. "If you pull the archive without authorization, you create liability." Grant's mouth tightened. Then authorize it. Adrian's pleasantness cracked just enough to show something firmer underneath. That's not how governance works. Grant looked at Marissa. Call Elaine. Marissa moved instantly, thumb already flying. Adrian lifted a hand. Grant, do not involve compliance in this. It will trigger a hold, and we'll miss the filing window. Grant turned back to him. That's the point. Adrian's eyes flashed. You are putting the foundation at risk. Grant's voice dropped lower. No, you did. On the other side of the city, Delia sat in a plastic chair outside the school office with her knees pressed together so tightly her legs hurt. Mateo's classroom door opened and closed down the hall as children moved like a river, unaware of the cliff adults were standing on. Rosa sat beside Delia, posture straight, hands folded, calm on purpose. A woman in a blazer stepped into the hallway holding a folder like it was a badge. Delia Monroe? The woman called. Delia stood. The woman smiled a smile that felt rehearsed. Hi, I'm with the verification service. We just need to confirm a few details on behalf of... Written authorization, Rosa said, voice steady and kind, like she was ordering coffee. The woman paused. Excuse me? Written authorization, Rosa repeated, with the requesting entity's name, the legal basis, and a contact number. The woman's smile tightened. Ma'am, we do this all the time. Delia felt her throat closing, but she kept her voice even. Then it should be easy to show. The woman hesitated, then opened the folder and slid a single page forward. Delia scanned it. It named an entity she didn't recognize. It cited policy concerns. It referenced alleged removal of materials. They were trying to drag work into school, to stain her in front of her son's teachers, to make her look unstable. Rosa read over Delia's shoulder. This is not a court order, Rosa said quietly. This is a request. The woman's tone cooled. We have to complete our report. Delia's phone buzzed. A message from Elaine Brooks. Do not engage directly. If they insist, give them my number. You are protected under an active compliance intake. Delia inhaled. Then she did the hardest thing. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply held out her phone. Call this number, Delia said. Elaine Brooks, Compliance Ombuds. The woman stared at the screen and something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, more like annoyance. Like a door she expected to open was suddenly locked from the inside. I'll note your refusal, the woman said. Delia's hands trembled, but she kept her voice level. Note that I asked for authorization and you couldn't provide it. The woman pressed her lips together, turned, and walked away. Delia stood there for a moment after, heart racing, listening to the hallway sounds return. A teacher laughing softly. A child's shoes squeaking. Rosa touched Delia's elbow. You didn't break a rule, she said. You used one. Delia swallowed hard. They'll come back. Rosa nodded. Then we'll be ready again. Back in the tower, Elaine Brooks picked up on the second ring, breath already sharp with urgency. Grant, she said, Marissa told me you want an escalation. I want an official investigation trigger, Grant said. Preservation notice is not enough. Adrian is blocking archive access under protocol, and off-site filing is moving through Stonebridge under a continuity channel tied to my father. Elaine's voice went quiet in the way that meant she was mentally arranging pieces. Okay, she said. We do this in steps. First, I issue a formal conflict of interest flag tied to Howard Alden and delegated counsel. Second, I open an internal case with systems logs and corridor footage as supporting evidence. Third, We notify Stonebridge that the partnership is under active compliance review for potential document tampering and governance conflict. Grant exhaled slowly. Will that pause them? It doesn't force them, Elaine said, but it creates legal exposure if they proceed with knowledge of an investigation. Most reputable partners will pause to avoid being dragged into a mess. Grant's jaw tightened. And if they're not reputable? Elaine's tone hardened. Then we go to emergency counsel, injunction, temporary restraining order. The Foundation can argue irreparable harm. Grant looked at Adrian through the glass wall of the legal suite. Adrian was already typing, already moving paper like a man trying to outrun daylight. I want the file box, Grant said. Elaine replied, You need authorization. Grant's voice turned simple. Then I'm authorizing it. Elaine paused. Grant cut in, calm and final. Elaine, draft the emergency directive under my executive authority as chair. Marissa will distribute it. Keisha will mirror the archive digitally. And I want Adrian's access frozen pending review. Marissa's eyes widened slightly. Adrian stepped out again, as if he'd felt the shift in pressure. Grant, Adrian said, tone controlled. This is reckless. Grant met his eye. No. Reckless is deleting logs. Reckless is clean shelves. Reckless is moving a clinic with patients in the chairs like they're boxes in storage. Adrian's jaw tightened. You're letting emotion lead governance. Grant's voice stayed steady. I'm letting truth lead governance. Marissa's tablet chimed. Emergency directive. Archive access authorized. Preservation event escalated. Systems hold. Immediate. Adrian stared at it. For the first time, he looked like a man who realized the room had a ceiling. Grant turned away from him and walked fast toward the archive vault floor with Marissa and Keisha behind him, footsteps crisp on the polished surface. 2 security doors, 2 key cards, 2 codes. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and metal shelves. Marissa moved down a row and pulled a box labeled in neat, older handwriting. Hale Mercer Foundation, Clinic Covenant, Original. Grant's pulse thudded once, hard. He lifted the lid. The top folder held typed pages, legal language, clauses and subclauses. Then, beneath it, a single sheet of paper, folded twice. A handwritten addendum on cream stationery. His mother's handwriting. Grant's fingers went still for a second before he unfolded it. The words were clear. Not dramatic, not sentimental. Just the kind of calm you write when you're terrified and refusing to show it. If anyone ever tells you the clinic must be optimized for the good of the whole, ask who benefits. If the shelves are suddenly clean, look for the hands that held the broom. And if my grandson ever has to choose between a schedule and a person, I pray he remembers this. Nothing built on erased truth deserves to stand. Grant's throat tightened. Marissa watched his face, and her own eyes softened, like she understood she was witnessing the moment a man stopped being a machine. Keisha whispered, "That's explicit." Grant stared at the last line again. Nothing built on erased truth deserves to stand. He folded the paper carefully, like it was fragile, then held it in his hand like it was steel. He looked up. "Elaine," he said into his phone, voice low and deadly calm, "we have the trigger. And if you've been waiting for the truth to catch up, comment truth. Because this is the moment the machine starts to realize it's not the only thing with power." Across town, Delia's phone buzzed again. A new email. Not from HR, not from the school. From Elaine Brooks. "You are now a protected witness in an active compliance investigation. Any contact with your child's school must route through us. If anyone returns, call me immediately. Delia read it twice, then closed her eyes for one breath. Not relief, not yet. But something close. Permission to keep standing. Grant moved quickly. Too much was still in motion. Stonebridge, off-site, parallel signatures, his father's fixer, Adrian's calm lies. He walked out of the archive room holding his mother's words, already dialing. "Marissa," he said, "get Elaine on a conference call with Stonebridge Council and pull the trustee list. I want to know who signed." Marissa nodded. "And Adrian." Grant's voice turned flat. "Freeze him." Keisha looked up. "He'll fight." Grant didn't slow. "Let him." Because the real fight wasn't inside the tower anymore. It was outside. In the places paperwork could ruin a family. In the places a quiet woman could lose everything just for refusing to look away. Grant reached the elevator and hit the button once. When the doors opened, he stepped in, holding the folded note like a promise. And somewhere off-site, a filing clock kept ticking. Grant watched the doors begin to close and said, almost to himself, "Not today." The door shut, and the next call he made would decide whether the clinic lived or whether the machine found another way to win. Just one problem. Howard Alden already had a backup plan on paper, and it was moving faster than Truth ever wanted to move. The elevator doors opened on the lobby like nothing in the world had changed. Same marble, same scent of citrus polish, same security desk where people handed over their names and believed it meant something. But Grant Hale stepped out holding a folded piece of paper in his coat pocket like it was a heartbeat. Marissa walked at his side, eyes sharp, jaw set. Keisha trailed a step behind with a laptop tucked under her arm, the kind of laptop that now carried a timeline the building couldn't erase. Elaine Brooks was already on the line in Grant's ear. "Stonebridge Council is available," she said. "So is our emergency outside counsel. If we do this, we do it clean. No drama, just a record." Grant's voice was quiet. "Put them through." He didn't head to the boardroom. He didn't ask permission from a room full of people who thought permission was a currency. He went to the small conference room off the lobby that had no windows and no audience, a room built for the kind of truth that didn't need applause. Marissa placed her tablet on the table and tapped. A screen lit up. Stonebridge's general counsel appeared first. A woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a measured expression, to sitting in front of a wall of books that looked expensive because they were well used. Beside her appeared Stonebridge's deal lead, the one Howard had been courting for weeks. He smiled like this was still just business. And then, to Grant's left, Elaine's camera came on from another floor, face calm, posture straight, a compliance officer who understood the difference between a rumor and a case file. Grant didn't waste time. "My name is Grant Hale," he said. "I am the chair of the Hale Mercer Foundation, and I'm notifying you that any off-site filing or transfer linked to the clinic relocation is under active compliance investigation for conflict of interest and document tampering." Stonebridge's counsel didn't blink. "What is the basis?" Grant nodded once to Keisha. Keisha connected her laptop. A video appeared on the screen. Not a movie, not a montage, just a corridor camera, grainy and indifferent, showing a man in a suit leaning in close to the front desk where Ramirez sat. The man's hand moved across the surface like he was gathering crumbs. Security stood beside him. Papers disappeared. No shouting, no fist, no theatrics, just a broom with a human hand. Grant let it play once, then paused it. He looked at Stonebridge's counsel. "That is corridor footage from our lobby," Grant said. "Captured the day our clinic covenant document was flagged for removal." Stonebridge's counsel's eyes narrowed. "Who is that individual?" Grant exhaled slowly. Martin Vale. The deal lead's smile faltered. Grant continued, still calm. Martin Vale is not an employee. He is a fixer who has worked for my father, Howard Alden. Stonebridge's counsel didn't move, but her attention sharpened like a blade. Proceed. Grant nodded to Keisha again. Keisha pulled up a log file. This, she said, careful and plain, is the print job trail tied to an internal queue ending in 7. It shows access to archived Covenant materials late at night. It shows attempted deletions of related logs, and it ties back to delegated authorization routed through corporate counsel, Adrian Pike. Stonebridge's counsel leaned slightly forward. You're alleging deletion. I'm stating record, Keisha replied. Grant watched Stonebridge's counsel absorb that. Then he did the third thing, the thing that changed the air. He reached into his coat and took out the folded page. He didn't wave it. He didn't read it like a speech. He placed it on the table like an artifact. My mother's handwritten addendum, he said. Original. Stonebridge's counsel's eyes flicked to it, then back to Grant. Read the relevant clause. Grant unfolded it carefully. His hands were steady now, not because he felt nothing, because he felt too much and refused to let it make him sloppy. He read one line. Nothing built on erased truth deserves to stand. Then he lifted his gaze. This addendum includes a restrictive covenant that requires continued clinic operation and prohibits transfer without compliance review and community impact assessment, Grant said. Any attempt to root around it is a violation. We will seek immediate injunctive relief if any filing proceeds. Stonebridge's deal lead cleared his throat. Grant, come on. This is... Stonebridge's counsel lifted a hand, silencing him without looking. Grant, she said, are you formally instructing us to pause? Yes, Grant said. Effective immediately. And if we do not, Grant's voice stayed level, then by noon we file for a temporary restraining order. You will be named as a party proceeding with notice of active compliance concerns. Your reputational and legal exposure will be unnecessary. I'm offering you an exit with dignity. Stonebridge's counsel sat back for a moment, eyes calculating, not cruel, practical. Then she nodded once. Stonebridge will pause, she said. Send the preservation notice and supporting exhibits to my office within the hour. Grant felt something loosen in his chest. Not victory, not yet, but the first structural click. The system, for once, was slowing down. Thank you, Grant said. Stonebridge's counsel's expression remained professional, but her voice softened a fraction. If what you're alleging is true, you did the right thing. The screen went dark. Grant stayed seated for a moment, staring at the empty black rectangle where speed had just been forced to stop. Elaine's voice came through his ear. Good. Now we move inside. Grant stood. Adrian, he said. Howard. Martin Vale. Marissa's eyes flicked up. Where do you want to start? Grant's mouth tightened. With the lie that tried to crush Delia. Across the city, Delia was standing in her kitchen, holding the second eviction notice like it was heavier than paper should be. It wasn't an eviction yet. It was the warning that made you stop sleeping. She taped Mateo's spelling list to the fridge the night before because she'd been trying to pretend life was still normal. The paper had curled at the edges from the steam of rice cooking. Rosa sat at the table, phone in hand. They called again, Rosa said quietly. From the verification service. Delia's stomach dropped. The school? Rosa shook her head. No, they called the building. Tried to confirm employment. Delia swallowed hard. They're trying to starve me out. Rosa nodded. But listen. She turned the phone toward Delia. An email subject line glowed on the screen. Protected witness notice. School contact directive. Issue. Delia's breath caught. She opened it. The language was clear, firm, official. The school had been instructed to cease any third-party verification contact not accompanied by a court order. Any further attempts would be treated as interference with an active compliance investigation. Delia read it twice. Then, for the first time in days, she sat down because her knees couldn't hold the weight of standing. Not because she was weak, because her body finally believed she could be. Rosa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Delia's throat tightened. Mateo doesn't know. Rosa's voice was low and warm. That's the point. Children should not have to. At the tower, Grant walked into the legal suite without knocking. Adrian Pike rose from behind his desk, posture composed, face carefully neutral. Grant didn't sit. Marissa stood behind him like a door. Elaine appeared in the doorway a moment later, binder in hand. Grant placed 3 things on Adrian's desk: a printed copy of the corridor video still, a page of the logs, the handwritten addendum. Adrian looked down at them, then back up. Grant, Adrian said, tone calm, I think you're overreacting. Did you freeze Delia Monroe as problematic employee to prevent her from being heard? Grant asked. Adrian blinked. HR handles classifications. Grant's voice stayed simple. Did you request the print job queue ending in 7? Adrian's lips pressed together. Systems, Grant interrupted softly. Yes or no? Adrian's eyes sharpened. Grant, you're creating a hostile work environment. Grant nodded. That's not an answer. Elaine opened her binder. We have your access trail, she said calmly. We have attempted log deletions. We have corridor footage tied to Martin Vale, who is not an employee and had no authorization to interact with internal records. Adrian's jaw flexed. He reached for the addendum, then stopped himself. Grant watched him carefully, not like a hunter, like a man finally seeing the shape of something he'd been trained not to question. Where is my father? Grant asked. Adrian's voice tightened. Grant? Grant turned slightly to Marissa. Call Howard. Tell him to come here, now, or he can meet me with counsel. Marissa moved. Adrian's composure cracked just enough to show frustration. This is bigger than you think, Adrian said. Your father. Grant's eyes narrowed. Say it plainly. Adrian hesitated, then chose a truth he thought would scare Grant back into line. Howard has agreements in motion, Adrian said. If you derail them, you'll fracture relationships, donors, partners, your own board. Grant's voice was low. My mother wrote a covenant to prevent exactly this. Adrian's expression hardened. That covenant was never meant to... Grant stepped closer, just one step. It was meant to protect people from erased truth. There it was again. The phrase, erased truth. Grant looked at Elaine. Open the independent audit, Grant said. External firm, full access, no internal filtering. Elaine nodded. I'll issue the notice within the hour. Grant looked back at Adrian. Your access is frozen. Effective now. Adrian's face went pale. You can't... Elaine's voice stayed calm. We can. We are. Then Marissa's phone chimed. She looked at the screen and her eyes flicked to Grant. He's here, she said quietly. Howard. Grant didn't flinch. He walked out of the suite and down the hallway toward the elevator bank, where a man in a charcoal coat stood with his hands in his pockets, as if he'd stepped in only to correct a schedule. Howard Alden, Grant's father, older, still sharp, still wearing authority like it came with his bones. Howard's gaze moved over Grant's face, then to Elaine, then to Marissa. "Grant," Howard said, "what is this?" Grant's voice stayed steady. "It's a pause." Howard's eyes narrowed. "A pause costs millions." Grant nodded. "Then we'll pay it." Howard's jaw tightened. "You're letting a clerk and a clinic hijack a legacy." Grant didn't raise his voice. He pulled the handwritten addendum from his pocket. "Mom wrote this," he said. Howard's eyes flicked to it like it was a ghost he'd been avoiding. Grant unfolded it and held it up, not theatrically, just enough for Howard to see the handwriting. Howard stared. For a second, his face softened with something that might have been memory. Then the hardness returned. "That's sentimental," Howard said, "not governance." Grant shook his head slowly. "It's governance, with a conscience." Howard's voice turned colder. "You don't understand what you're undoing." Grant's eyes locked onto his father's. "I understand exactly," Grant said. "You built power on clean shelves." Howard's nostrils flared. Grant continued, voice low, precise. "Martin Vale was in our lobby. Your man. Our logs were targeted. Delia was labeled to silence her, and you tried to route the transfer off-site to avoid my mother's covenant." Howard's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're accusing me," Howard said. Grant nodded once. "I'm naming what happened." Howard stared at his son, and for a moment the building seemed to hold its breath. Then Grant did the thing that ended it. Not with humiliation, with consequence. He turned slightly toward Elaine. "I'm removing Howard Alden from any governance role or influence over this package," Grant said. "Effective immediately. Conflict of interest. Enter it into record." Howard's eyes widened. "You can't do that." Elaine's voice was calm. "He can." Grant looked back at his father. "I'm not doing this to punish you," Grant said. "I'm doing this to stop you." Howard's face tightened, anger and something else beneath it. "Who taught you to talk like that?" he snapped. Grant didn't blink. "Mom." Silence. A clean, cold silence. Howard's mouth opened, then closed. He turned his head slightly as if looking away would restore control. It didn't. Grant stepped back, not triumphant, just certain. And somewhere in the city, a clinic was still holding patients like fragile promises. Grant looked at Elaine. "Call Nora Patel. Tell her we're freezing any relocation activity today. No interruptions, no silent policy changes." Elaine nodded. "Done." Grant looked at Marissa. "Reinstate Delia's status. Not quietly, officially. Clear her record." Marissa's eyes softened. "I'll draft it." Grant exhaled once, slow. Then he did something that mattered more than any memo. He left the tower, not to pose for cameras, not to take credit. He went to the clinic. The clinic did not look like a place where billion-dollar decisions should be made. Fluorescent lights that buzzed softly, a coffee machine that had seen better days. Posters on the wall explaining medication, side effects in plain language. Nora Patel stood near the front desk with a stack of charts in her arms, shoulders tense. When she saw Grant walk in, she didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She simply held his gaze like a doctor measuring a pulse. "Are we breathing?" she asked. Grant nodded once. "Yes." Nora's shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Delia appeared from a hallway, coat still on, hair slightly messy like she'd been running through hours without rest. She froze when she saw him. Grant didn't move closer. He waited. because he had finally learned something his power hadn't taught him. You don't rush the people the system has been rushing. Delia's voice came out quiet. Did you stop it? Grant nodded. I paused the off-site filing. Stonebridge is on notice. Elaine opened an independent investigation, and your witness protection is active. The school has directives. Delia's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel it, because she had been holding herself together for too long. Nora stepped forward, charts still in hand. And the clinic. Grant looked around at the waiting room, at an elderly man with a knit cap, at a mother rocking a toddler, at a woman staring at her hands like she was counting reasons to hope. The clinic stays, Grant said. Not as a favor, as a covenant. Nora's jaw trembled. She cleared her throat. We already refused 3 patients today because the pharmacy. Grant cut in gently. That stops now. Any supply interruption? Any policy change? Any silent denial? It stops. And if someone tries again, they'll do it under an auditor's flashlight? Delia's hands shook. They tried to make me look like I was stealing. Grant nodded slowly. I know. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the folded addendum. He didn't hand it to her. He held it in his hand like a reminder. My mother wrote something, he said quietly. She wrote that nothing built on erased truth deserves to stand. Delia stared at him. Then after a pause, she whispered, She knew. Grant nodded. She knew enough to protect you before she ever met you. Nora's eyes flicked between them. Why would she? Grant looked down for a moment, then back up. Because she was the kind of person who didn't need to be asked to do the right thing, Grant said. And because she probably saw what power can do when it gets bored with people. Delia's breath caught. Grant's voice softened. You did the right thing too, quietly, when it cost you. Delia swallowed hard. I did it because there are kids in this city who don't get a second chance. Grant nodded. And because you're the kind of person my mother tried to protect. He didn't offer money. He didn't offer publicity. He offered what Delia had been fighting for all along: security, belonging, dignity. Your job is reinstated, Grant said. Your record is cleared. The building notices will be addressed through legal support from our community council partner, not as charity, as repair. Delia's lips parted slightly. Repair. Grant nodded. We're not doing favors. We're fixing what was broken. Nora let out a breath that sounded like someone who had been underwater. In the hallway behind Delia, a small voice called, Mom! Mateo! He came around the corner with a backpack too big for his shoulders, cheeks pink from winter air. Delia turned instantly, her face softening in a way it hadn't softened in days. Mateo saw Grant and paused. He looked at the expensive coat, the quiet posture, the unfamiliar man in their clinic. Delia's voice was gentle. Mateo, this is Grant. Mateo studied Grant for a second, then looked back up at his mother. Is he a doctor? Grant's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost an ache. No, Grant said softly, but I'm here to help keep the doctors here. Mateo nodded as if that was the only thing that mattered. Okay. Delia's eyes filled then, finally, and she blinked fast, trying to keep it contained. Grant crouched slightly, not too close, keeping distance respectful. Hey, he said to Mateo, I like your backpack. Mateo looked down. It's heavy. Grant nodded seriously. That means you're carrying important stuff. Mateo's lips twitched. Spelling. Grant looked at Delia. Spelling wins in the end, he said quietly. Delia let out a small laugh that sounded surprised to come from her. And in that moment, the story did what it was always meant to do. It didn't end with a spectacle. It ended with a room breathing again. Later, when the clinic settled into its normal rhythm, Nora took Grant aside near the coffee machine. "You know this doesn't make you a hero," she said. Grant nodded. "Good." Nora studied him. "Then why do it?" Grant glanced down at the folded addendum in his hand. "Because my mother tried to leave me a map," he said. "And because Delia reminded me what happens when people don't follow one." Nora's eyes softened. "Your father?" Grant's jaw tightened. "He'll fight." Nora nodded. "And you?" Grant looked back into the waiting room where Delia was kneeling in front of Mateo, helping him zip his coat. He spoke quietly. "I'm not fighting for control anymore," Grant said. "I'm fighting for people." Nora exhaled, slow. "Then you might win," she said. Outside, the sun was lowering, lighting the sidewalk with gold. Delia and Mateo stepped out into the cold. Rosa walked with them, hand on Delia's shoulder like a blessing. Grant followed a few steps behind, not inserting himself, not claiming space. Just present, just steady. Delia stopped at the curb and looked back at him. "You didn't have to," she said. Grant shook his head. Simple. "I did." Delia stared for a moment, then nodded once, as if she accepted the truth of that. Mateo tugged Delia's sleeve. "Mom, can we get hot chocolate?" Delia smiled at him, the kind of smile that makes a child feel safe without needing to be told. "Yeah," she said. "We can." Grant watched them step forward, the street quiet, the winter air crisp. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt less like a machine and more like a place where one quiet, moral act could change the direction of everything. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who needs hope. And when this ends, click the next video on your screen. I promise it's worth it. Because sometimes the day everything changes isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman refusing to look away, and a man finally choosing to see.